Welcome to Cops and Convicts with Sean Sheppard. I'm your host, Sean Sheppard, and I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit that thumbs up button for your guy. By doing so, you'll help the channel grow and increase our visibility across the web. Now that we've got that out the way, I want to welcome today's guest, a woman who is on an academic and activist crusade and also happens to be formerly incarcerated, Miss Laura Murray. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's get started with the beginning for you. Where are you originally from? Do you have any siblings? Did your parents stay together? Tell me about the beginnings of life for Laura Murray.
So I was born in Sacramento, but moved shortly thereafter to San Diego. So I was raised in North County, San Diego area. What they now call Encinitas, used to be Leucadia. My folks are still around, and they've been married 67 years, which is amazing. And I have two older brothers.
So how did those older brothers treat you growing up?
They were pretty harsh. They were pretty harsh with me. So there was a dysfunctional relationship, and there still exists a dysfunctional relationship. I'm the baby, I'm the only girl. I really don't know what happened, but we're not close.
So you're not close to either one of your brothers?
No, I mean, I speak to one, but the other one still doesn't speak to me to this day, no matter what I do. So I can't control his attitude. I can only control mine.
Amen to that. So your parents have been married for 67 years.
Yes.
From the outside looking in, what do you think the key to the health of that relationship has been? What do you think has kept them together?
I think, well, they had a lot of things in common, but what my mother tells me is that my father had a great sense of humor. So actually, I think it's the humor that keeps them together, to be able to stay together no matter what. And also, people just didn't get divorced in those days. And in my culture, you stayed with your husband no matter what. And so they've stuck it through the hard times. And now my mom is 89 and my dad is going on 94, and they're still supporting each other. So
that's fascinating. God bless them both. I had an aunt and an uncle. They both passed away. They were married 63 years. And I thought that was probably going to be the longest union I ever witnessed. But hearing that your parents are 67 years and still going, that's fantastic. You just said something, Laura. You said something about your culture. In your culture, you stay together. What do you mean by your culture? Explain what your culture is and what you mean by that.
So I feel like people get their cultural, ethics and whatnot from their folks. And what my mom always used to say is, she used to say something to the effect of, Irish couples stayed together. It didn't matter if they drank. It didn't matter what the husband did, but they stayed together. And she had told me that about her grandparents, that they stayed together no matter what. So to me, I interpreted that as a cultural thing, because she always brought up the Irish heritage and everything about it. So I don't know if it's true of other cultures. I don't even really know if it's true of my culture, but it was linked through that by my mother. So she's like, we didn't leave our husbands. And, when I think about it, my mom really, I don't know if she was comparing it to other cultures. I have no idea. But as a child, that's what I internalized.
Well, and perhaps she could have been talking about, subconsciously about your family's culture, just your family's culture, because
right.
I think if we went outside of your family and looked at the Irish culture, we'd find just as much divorces in any other culture. But, people's families set their own cultures. And so I'd be fascinated to see, like, if you look back in your ancestral lineage, how, if people stayed together.
Yeah, and I think also it was a generational thing, divorce in the 30s was seldom talked about or discussed, so to me, I think it was more of a generational thing than a cultural thing.
So did you grow up lower class, middle class, upper class?
Middle class. I'd say I grew up middle class.
So I asked that question because if you go back to the 1930s, and the climate then was that women stayed home barefoot and pregnant. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So staying together, if you didn't have the education and you weren't going to be able to get a job, unfortunately, staying together was probably the lesser of the two evils. If you were in a bad situation, at least you were going to be able to have a roof over your head, so on and so forth. I'm so glad that we've moved beyond the 30s.
Right.
Right. So go ahead.
We moved beyond the 30s, and now the middle class is disappearing. So, you know what I mean? There's not even that, there's really not an option for the woman to stay home barefoot and pregnant, even if the partner chose that. Nowadays, because of the economic climate, this is not a viable option, So
I agree with you. I'm dead set against the whole notion of being barefoot and pregnant. I'm glad that we have evolved from that point. We still have some more evolution to go, but at least we've left that behind. So you're in San Diego. Did you go to private school, public school? What was your childhood like?
I went to public school. I grew up pretty isolated. Our house was pretty much the only house on the block that had children. There might have been somebody about a quarter mile down the road, but it was pretty rural. So there wasn't, there wasn't a lot of other kids to play with or anything like that. But I went to public school. It was a pretty decent school. We were probably about 3 miles from the beach. It was the kind of upbringing where, children didn't have to worry about, at least we didn't, about being trafficked and about being kidnapped, and the front door was always unlocked. In the beginning, that's how things started out. And then, our house was burglarized a couple times, but much later in the 80s, I think, late 70s or 80s. But I mean, I grew up, and I feel that I was pretty fortunate in the way that I grew up. But there were other mitigating circumstances. My father drank, on the weekends very heavily. And there was a beach kind of drug culture going on at the time where, smoking weed and those kind of things was it wasn't considered acceptable by any means by my parents, but with the people that I hung out with and this and that, it was considered acceptable.
So what year were you born?
So I was born in 62.
Okay. So you're a little bit old. You're a little bit older than me.
Dude, I'm a lot older than you.
Oh, no, you're 6 years older than me.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, you look really good.
Well, I appreciate it. So you grew up in North County, and you said Encinitas or Escondido?
Encinitas.
Okay. So you said it was rural. Was your school racially diverse? Was it homogenous? And then I want to talk more about the drug culture in San Diego, because it seems to me, I lived 25 years in San Diego, that weed is interwoven into the fabric of Southern California. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So tell me about your schooling and the social climate in your school.
So, I think where I am now, I actually think about that all the time. And I think how I was really kind of robbed. And so were the other people that I went to school with. My elementary school, there was one Black family that lived in that town, and that they had a boy and a girl that went to that school. And that was the only exposure I ever had to Black people. And we, you know, in San Diego, it's practically 50% Hispanic, you know, and when you're a little kid, what's normal is normal, you know what I mean? And you don't realize, where are all the Black people in this town, and why aren't there Black people in this town, honestly? And my mom started working when I was about 10 years old. So I had a best friend, and I went to her house every day after school, and her folks, her mom stayed home and her father owned a landscape business, and they only spoke Spanish. So I started speaking Spanish at an early age because I started to answer her mother in Spanish, you know, just out of politeness. And then it was just kind of cool to me to be able to speak, you know, a different language. As a child, you pick it up easy. So, you know, I would speak Spanish at home, and my mom would be like, "You're Irish, stop speaking Spanish." And I think it somewhat irritated her. I don't think she meant it at all as being racist, although now, you know, it seems now it would be considered racist. So, but the fact that there was an absence, you know, of Black people, and I'm not even going to say people of color, because there were people of color, but there were no Black people.
But in your class, in your school, there were people of Latino descent, but
oh yeah, it had to be 40-50%. Like, there was a huge population because it's a border town. So
you're talking about your school at that time. So
right, elementary school, junior high, and high school, there was only the one girl and the one boy that were Black in all those schools. There was never, and then finally in high school, I think there was one more Black young man, but that was it. There was no exposure, there was no inclusion. And even if I asked or we spoke about it, they're like, "Well, Black people don't live here. What are we supposed to do?" And that was the answer. But no one ever looked to see why, you know, they don't live there. So,
but you did have a diverse upbringing, because it wasn't just white people. It was white people. It was Latino people.
right.
Were there Filipino people in your school at all?
No, there was Japanese.
Okay.
People. Yeah.
All right. So it was a diverse upbringing. There just wasn't Black people in your life.
Yeah. Well, and to me, then that's not diverse. If there's an entire group missing, like there's something, I just think there's something going on there, you know, with property, with perhaps redlining at the time. Like, I didn't know in the 60s, but, you know, that kind of stuff existed, you know.
It still exists now, though.
It still exists. Yeah.
Well, I find that fascinating, because typically when you move to a rural area, like you were saying, it's pretty much going to be homogenous. And for you to go to a school and have an upbringing where you were around people from different cultures that spoke a different language, that kind of makes you an outlier in a lot of cases. That's not the norm. So you're in this school, you're going to school with different people, you speak a different language. Talk more with me about the extracurricular activities you got involved with while you were in school. Did you play a sport? I know you mentioned there was a drug culture in and around you. Talk to me about what you did outside of school and away from family.
So I played softball for a little while. I still love baseball. And I surfed and I skateboarded every single day, everywhere I went. And I really didn't get into that drug culture. I think I was about 13, and I started just, you know, with both your folks working, you know, there's a lot of idle time, and we didn't have the same homework load that kids have nowadays. Now it's pretty intense. I think, though, even if I'd had that same load, I still would have ignored it. So I did really well in school, early in school. But then once I started hanging out with older people at the beach and that kind of thing, and as my father continued to drink, I started spending less and less time at home and staying the weekends at my friend's house and smoking weed. And, you know, for most people, it's just experimentation. But if you're an addict, it turns into a whole different thing. And for me, it was an escape. It was an escape from people arguing and yelling at each other in my house and my father drinking. And I didn't really have an adult that had really inserted themselves in my life or maybe intervened. So I just kept on that path. And by 15, I started selling drugs at school.
What drugs?
I sold weed. I sold hash. We used to have hash back in the day, right? Honey oil, those old school kind of drugs. Just anything I could make a buck on. Basically, I started dealing, you know, which helped support my little habit. So I didn't have any intense habits. I tried Coke every once in a while. I'm not a big fan. But I did stay on the weed and the hash and all that. And then finally I overdosed at school, in high school. The police were called, the paramedics were called, everyone was called. Of course, my parents were called.
You overdosed on marijuana?
No, I overdosed on pills at school at a pep rally. Super embarrassing.
I was about to say, I mean, I want to hear about this overdosing on weed.
Yeah,
I never heard of that.
It was, I think nowadays people can overdose on weed, but the kind of weed they have now, but
Yeah.
But then it was pills. You know, I had taken some pills out of a relative's medicine cabinet, and I had just taken one too many of that I'd taken many times, and I fell out right there at school. So then people got involved. There was an attempt to get me in counseling, but I was super resistant to the whole idea. You know, I became really rebellious. So things just, you know, and I was in a gifted class in high school. I was put into a gifted English class, and I just basically didn't care about any of it, you know.
So do you remember what those pills were? Did you, at the time, did you know what you were taking?
I didn't. I knew they were barbiturates. They were taken for sleep and they were taken for pain. And that's all I remember. You know, it was kind of a roll of the dice, really, when I think about it. You know, it was really dangerous, but it didn't. I was pretty much on a mission of destruction by then. So
you're doing well in school.
Well, I wasn't really doing well. I wasn't showing up to my classes, but for some reason I had such a decent relationship with my teachers socially that people often covered for me.
Really?
You know? Yeah. So, I mean, I still attribute that to me coming where I come from and look how I look and act how I act. And I got away with a lot that I shouldn't have gotten away with.
So let me ask you this. The students that you went to school with were white, Latino, you said Japanese. What about the teachers?
All white.
All white.
Every single one of them. Yeah. I had some Hispanic teachers. I had a really, really good Hispanic counselor that woman really tried to look out for me a lot. You know, she constantly stuck up for me and everything else, but it was just, I just couldn't open up about earlier abuse that I had suffered. And I just held everything in, and I was just really a confused mess.
So I want to recap. You were doing well in school. You said you were a good student.
Right.
You're in a household where your father's an alcoholic. There was lots of arguing. I'm gonna guess that there was some violence in your house too. I'm saying that because you and I come from the same household. Okay. I guess when I look back, I don't think my father limited his drinking to the weekends. It would increase on the weekends. I watched my father physically abuse my mother. Couple what you're experiencing with your parents, your two brothers were not kind to you. It sounds like they were. It sounds like they were abusive to you as well. You were playing softball. Sounds like your participation in softball started to waver, and it gave way to hanging out with friends at the beach, skateboarding, smoking weed, drinking alcohol, and you were in a family member's house, found some pills in the medicine cabinet, overdosed, did not want to get treatment. So what happened to you after that?
So they really didn't have treatment, back in those days. There was no treatment, let alone juvenile treatment. And yeah, for some reason, my father only drank on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and that was his defense for saying that I'm not an alcoholic. But he went into fits of rage when he drank, and it terrified me. Like he wouldn't put his hands on my mom, but he would throw things at us. Sometimes, one time he did throw me, but
he threw you. He physically threw you.
Yeah, and I used to challenge him because I hated his alcohol. I hated him at the time. Which of course is no longer the case, but I had a lot of anger because of that drinking, because he couldn't, to me, be a normal dad. But yeah, so I overdosed, I resisted, I just spiraled away. My mom by then is working full time, she has a good job. My brother had pretty much gone off to the older one, the one that really used to torture me, and he used to break my fingers because he loved the sound of the snap of the bone, is what he used to tell me. Yeah, he was pretty abusive, and
he would break your fingers,
plural, one at a time. But yeah, because he liked the snap of the bone. That's what he used to tell me. So I used to try and make myself tougher. I used to punch walls and do everything so that when he would do that, I wouldn't show any fear, so that became another trip in itself. And things just basically started spiraling down, with the drugs and everything else. And then when I was away one weekend and I was hanging out at some gas station by the beach, I met an older man who was like 29 at the time.
How old were you?
I was 15.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So, and he was a Marine. He was like a gunny sergeant, and we started dating. And of course, my mom and dad didn't like it. But I guess they thought if they forbid me to see him, that I would just continue to see him. So, they would have him over at the house and everything, and they would try the best they could.
Time out. Your parents went along with this dude committing statutory rape with you.
Basically, because I feel like if they said that they'd forbid me to see him, that I would just see him anyway. And they were correct. They thought, well, maybe if we ask him to dinner, if he hangs out at the house, at least they could kind of control the relationship or something. I don't really understand, because they did in the beginning say, we're against this, we don't want this and this and that. But then I guess they just figured I was going to see him anyway, which is what I would do. I would sneak out at night to go see him anyway. I was pretty hell-bent, on being with this person.
They could have had him locked up, and the only place you would have seen him is if you went to visit him.
This is true, but my folks have never, they don't like calling the cops, which is really interesting when I look at it, because these two have never broken the law in their entire lives, but they don't like involving the police in their life at all. Which
have they told you why?
I think that my father has a distrust. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it'll air family laundry. Maybe because they don't trust the police. I I really never knew why, but there are moments in my life when other parents would have absolutely called the cops, even when I was doing drugs. And my parents didn't do that. They would say, get out of the house, get all your stuff and get out of the house, but they never once called the cops. And I was like, wow, you guys are actually OGs, you know, in that regard. That so also this 29-year-old man was a 29-year-old Black man. So, but my parents, they didn't really react to that. There was no reaction to that. They were more concerned about the age, his age, as opposed to my age. So I just slowly started spending more and more time with him. And eventually I just moved into his apartment, and I was 16. So I moved into his apartment in Oceanside. And mind you, I really never learned how to cook besides grilling steaks on Fridays. I didn't have any life skills at all, none. And he started becoming abusive. He started leaving me for weeks at a time with no food. I have no car, no food. There's no cell phones. I can't call my mom and say anything because they're like, well, you made your bed, you sleep in it now. And so I was in a really bad position, and I was just about to leave him when I found out I was pregnant.
So did you drop out of school at that point? Were you still going to school?
So I dropped out of school. Nobody from school came looking for me, nothing.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's how it is. Like, you know, yeah, upper middle class has it good. But, you know, the thing is I just feel like nobody comes to look for you. You know what I mean? And so I moved in with him and was living with him. But then, you know, he had done some tours in Vietnam. He had a lot of PTSD. And he got out of the Marine Corps and was, you know, my dad had actually got him a job, you know, at the power plant. My father even got him a job, you know, to work, because my father worked at the nuclear power plant as an engineer. So he got him a job too, but he just started not showing up to work. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like it was a pretty good job, but you know, I'm a baby, I'm 16. I don't have any life experience. I don't really know what's going on with this man, you know, who served like 3 tours in Vietnam, including Tet. He was in recon. I'm sure he's seen some really ugly things, and he starts acting really strange and not coming home. And I don't understand, you know, I thought everything in my idealistic head, I thought everything was going to be okay. And it was so far from okay. And I was going to move back, you know, go back home. And then I found out I was pregnant. And then I knew I couldn't go back home, you know. So yeah, he would just leave me with like, I would get like a pot of potatoes and eat that for 2 weeks. And then I would get a pot of rice and I would eat that for 2 weeks. And honestly, I just recently, this last month, told my mom how that was for me, you know. And I've never been able to talk to her about it before. And I said, you know, it got really bad. And then I was really worried about the baby. I had no prenatal care. I didn't have any of that. And I finally, one of his friends' wives is like, you know, you should go to the doctor. I'll go to the doctor with you. I'll get Medi-Cal, because I didn't know anything about social services either. You know, I was fortunate never to have had depended on that before. And so, but I also had no life skills, like I said. So my friend's wife took me, you know, and got Medi-Cal. And finally, when I was about 8 months pregnant, I went to see an OBGYN.
Wow, 8 months into your pregnancy.
So, I mean, I read, you know, I've always read. I love to read. So I took the bus to the library and got all these books on it. You know, I wanted to keep the baby.
How old were you? How old were you when you found out you were pregnant?
I was 16.
So you're 16. You're 16 years old when you moved in with him. And
I was actually 15 when I moved in with him.
So,
yeah.
So a year later, you're pregnant, and you had the wherewithal to go to the library and read up on being pregnant.
Right. And I had to take the bus, and I'd never taken the bus before either. So, you know, the little mini bus they used to have, right? They used to have a little mini bus in North County. And I looked up the schedule because there's no internet, but you get that little piece of paper and looked up the schedule and looked it up. And I took a bus to the library and I got all the books. It would have been so much easier if there was an internet back then. But I got all the books that I thought I could read about it, you know, and I started taking prenatal vitamins that I got from the store. And I just started doing the most that I could because I was terrified. You know, I'd never even babysat before, let alone had a baby. I don't know what I was thinking. And so
Were you keeping this from your parents?
in the beginning, I had kept it from my parents. My parents were on a trip, a long trip to Europe, and they were in London or something like that. And so they were gone for a long time, so it was easier to keep from them. And I was really afraid that my mom would try and force me to have an abortion. And I was dead set against it, not for any kind of religious reasons, but because I wanted to keep the baby. And so by the time they got back, it was too late. You know, I was like 8 months or something like that too. So yeah, they didn't find out till well after the fact. And even then, my mom said, "You've got to give it up for adoption. You can't keep it. This is going to ruin your life. You know, what about abortion and this and that?" And I told her, there's no way in the world that I'm going to do that. I want to keep this baby. She's like, "You're 16. You have no idea." And she was right. But, you know, she came at me a little harsh. So, of course, I'm not going to listen to her. There's already a huge rift between us. And so, yeah, when I was 17 by the time I had Andrew, and it was just before Christmas time. And yeah, I had the baby, and his father became even more detached, became even more abusive. We ended up losing our apartment. We had to couch surf, you know, and here I have a newborn. And some of the places we stayed in weren't even the safest places.
He didn't want, he didn't want the baby?
He said he wanted the baby. He was excited about the baby, but what he said and what he did were two different things. You know, we would move into his friend's house for a couple months, move into another friend's house for a couple months, and his friends would try and tell me, "Yo, you know, there's more going on here than what you know," but they couldn't tell me anything, you know. So it wasn't until he started having really bad flashbacks. He slept with a loaded 357 under his pillow. He had taught me how to use it, you know, all this other stuff, but he started having very bad flashbacks where he would wake up, but he wasn't really awake, and he would try and grab for the gun. And then one time I was sitting on the couch and he came in and I heard the hammer click back, and I was holding the baby, was next to me. And I didn't look back. I just got the baby and held him as close as I could to my chest. And he was saying something like, they're coming, we have to set up a perimeter. I don't know what he was really saying at the time, but I just knew I had a loaded 357, you know, at my head. And I knew I had to protect my son. And I just waited and didn't say anything. And I heard him walk away. And the next day I called my mom and said, you know, he might hurt the baby. I've got to get out of here. That was the first time he'd ever put the baby in a compromising position. And I said, I've got to leave, Mom. I've got to get out of here. And she said, well, you know, remember what I told you before about what she said about not leaving who you're with. She said, that's the father of your child. This is the decision you've made. You have to figure something out. And so I called homeless shelters, which I'd never done either. I was at a payphone. I had a bunch of quarters.
At 17 years old, you're doing all this at 17.
No life skills. I called homeless shelter after homeless shelter. And they kept saying, you know, they weren't, not only, I didn't really answer the questions right at 17 either, I don't think, but they were not friendly to me. They were not, you know, they were not encouraging me in any way to try and find a different, they're like, sorry, we're full, ma'am. And then they would ask me questions about insurance. And I didn't know, I didn't have insurance. I didn't have any of that. And I didn't know all the answers, you know, and so they would get irritated, I think, with me, but the upshot of it was they were full. You'll have to wait 2 weeks. And I said, well, ma'am, you know, he threatened my life last night. And they're like, I'm sorry, you know, is there a relative you can go to get away? And I was like, no, ma'am. And then all the homeless shelters were in downtown San Diego. They weren't, by then I was living in Vista. And so there was nothing even close, no kind of, now they have women's shelters that you can go to all over, I feel like, but then there wasn't a lot. This was 1980. So I called my mom back crying again. And I said, please come get me. You know, he's going to hurt the baby. I've called all the homeless shelters. Nobody has room. Please come get me. And so finally she pulled up in her 240Z and I packed. I hardly had anything. I didn't have any clothes. I only had like one pair of pants and a dress, and the rest of the stuff was the baby slept in a little picnic crib, like the kind you would take to a picnic. Like it was, he didn't have a crib. He had a travel thing and no
Laura,
car seat.
Do me a favor and turn your volume down a little bit.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I got it.
Because I can hear you, but I could also hear myself when I talk to you.
Okay. How's that?
That's perfect. I can't hear myself.
Okay. Sorry.
No problem. So your mom comes and gets you. Does he come after you?
No,
He just lets you go. Like
he just lets me go, you know,
Okay.
and I would call around at his friend's house and tell him, you know, do you want to see the baby? Do you want to come see the baby? And he would come. At first he came a lot to see the baby and he would come over for dinner. My folks would have him over for dinner. And finally my mom said, you know, he's coming over for dinner every night. If he wants to see you, you know, he needs to make an effort to try and fix things, you know? And so she said, I don't want him over for dinner every night because I feel like we're taking care of the baby, we're taking care of you, and he's just going back to dating you again. And that kind of made sense. And I told him, hey, my mom says you can't come over anymore. And he got really upset and threw a fit and probably only came over maybe one time after that, didn't bring the baby back for hours. I was in a panic. I thought he'd kidnapped him. I called my mom and she's like, well, you're the one who let him have the baby. And I was like, oh my God. So he finally brought the baby back and I told him, you know, what were you doing for hours and hours? Like, you know, I was worried about him and he's only a year, you know, like a year, 18 months old. And he got really pissed off again, and that was the last time I ever saw him. I've never seen him again since.
And do you know what happened to him?
He lives I know what happened to him because my son ended up tracking him down. My son became a sheriff. And he needed to prove where his parents came from. And so the undersheriff said, I have your father's address. Do you want to meet him? And my son is like, yes, I do. He said, here's his address. So my son got a rental car and he and his buddy drove to Moscow, Idaho and met him. So
while you were pregnant with your son, Andrew, did you stop doing drugs?
I did. I did stop completely.
You were a really special teenager. I'm not saying that you made all of the right decisions because there isn't a teenager alive that has, but for you to be the age you were, I don't know if you can look back and say you were addicted to drugs at the time, but when you got pregnant, you stopped doing drugs, you caught the bus, learned how to catch the bus, went to the library and read up on what you should be doing as a pregnant mother. I'm assuming you gave birth to a healthy child despite your terrible diet of just potatoes and rice, right? When part of the reason that you're on this show is because I was very impressed with what you had to say during our virtual game changer event last month. and the fact that you are really pursuing as much education as you possibly can now, but the seeds were planted back then. You said you were a good student and you loved to read, and you taught yourself how to prepare yourself to be a mother. And that's why I have to say that you were a special teenager. There was something going on with you. You were gifted with something back then to help you survive, help your child survive. So the father of your child is gone. You're at home with your parents. You're a single mom. You had stopped doing drugs. Now what happens to you?
So, now my son is like 2, 3, and my mom says, you're 18. You need to get your high school diploma if you want to live here and continue to live here. Mind you, my mom is a school librarian. At this point, she's working for Palomar College, and she's a reference librarian. She has a degree in liberal arts, so a bachelor's degree. My father has a master's in education. So I was fortunate that education was constantly pushed as a way out. So I went back to school, and in 2 months I tested. And the first time I tested, I got my GED. There was no high set. There was none of this. You studied, you took the entire test at once. I was pretty terrified, and I got my GED. And my mom said, well, now you go to college. You can go to community college. So I signed up, and I was a criminal justice major at 18 in 1980 at Palomar College. So I was still really proud of myself that I did get my GED at the age of 18.
No drugs, right?
No, the thing is I did go back to smoking weed. I did go back to those. I feel like whenever I'm in that house with my parents, that's when it starts again. And I'm not using them as an excuse, like, is this all on me? This is my accountability, but that's my trigger. And so when I got back to living with my parents, my dad was still doing his drinking thing. My mom was still gone a lot. So I started smoking weed again. Didn't do pills or anything, but started smoking weed.
Did they know you were doing this? Did they know you were doing this?
I don't know. Like, I think so. I think they would. I mean, I went out every night. So I was a single mom. There would be ladies' nights. I had friends, and my son I'd put him to bed and I'd go out. Well, of course, my mom got sick of it. She got sick of it, and she kept telling me to stop going out. Well, I didn't, we had these fights. I wouldn't stop going out, and then crystal meth came along, and then cocaine, freebasing cocaine came out. So I got back in that culture, not hanging out with bums. Like most of the people I hung out with were Marines. We're next to Oceanside. And even though my dad's Army, he's not a big fan of the Marines. I started dating Marines and started going out. And it was casual use. I still did really well in school. I had good grades at Palomar College. I was a criminal justice major, and I would smoke out and go to class, and in my head, I guess it was just a coping mechanism. And plus I was 18, 19 and wanted to party. So
were the Marines doing drugs with you?
Oh yeah.
So they either didn't get drug tested back then.
That was before. Yeah, it was before drug testing came in around 1984, I think 85, because I remember them saying I'm getting tested. But then they were not getting tested. It was just a free for all. They would come from a different state. They would party, so.
So you're in college, you're doing hard drugs.
Occasionally hard drugs, mostly just weed, but yeah.
Well, a mixture. You had them on rotation. You had them on some rotation.
Right. They were on rotation.
And you're trying to raise your son. You're trying to have a social life, which is completely normal for someone your age. What happened while you were so you're at Palomar Community College. So you're living at home and commuting to school.
Right.
Okay.
So my son he's in preschool at that point. I get him into preschool. And, his father's not paying any child support or anything. I'm living off of what was then AFDC, and living with my folks and paying them a little bit of money, getting my own groceries, and
What's AFDC?
aid for, I think it's aid for family dependent children.
Okay.
I might have the F wrong, but I know it's for dependent children. So, and then they go after my son's dad for child support, but they're not getting anything, right? So, and so, like I said, crystal meth came along. Everybody started experimenting with crystal meth. I wish we knew then what we know now. But at that time, it was great. I worked graveyard shift, in the summertime mostly, and that meth made me one of the best workers there ever was at the time. But then it became like a daily thing. Then it was not a good thing. I kept it under control. I started going to school. I started doing this and started doing the meth at the same time. And I was hanging out with this guy who introduced me to this other person. And that person was a cook, what they referred to as a cook. They literally had a meth lab in their garage in Encinitas, right off the I-5 freeway. You could see the house from the freeway. And there was a meth lab in there. And this guy had a degree in chemistry I remember being really impressed. It was like from Berkeley, I think, or Stanford, one of the Bay Area schools.
The original Breaking Bad.
Yeah, and this guy was a cook.
Wow.
And my friend couldn't go to the lab, which was Quantum Laboratories in Carlsbad, which is now where the DEA task force is in that same building. He couldn't go, so he said, "Hey, you want to make $500? Just go pick up this material at the lab and you can make $500. And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I can go in and do that, So the guy made me practice saying pseudoephedrine hydrochloride and ephedrine hydrochloride and saying the words so that I would know them perfectly, and telling me what kind of vibe you have to have. And you have to act like the truck is broke down, so you're driving your personal car and you need to pick these up for the laboratory." And I did it so well, they fired the other guy, which the guy's like, "You took my hustle," but they fired him and hired me to start working those runs.
So you were a mule.
Yeah, so now I'm like 20 years old and I'm a mule for a lab trying to make some extra money, I was a single parent and I was doing meth on a daily basis. So they gave me, those bullets of meth every time I'd go. So, he'd just scoop into this big bucket and give it to me. And I didn't ask questions, and I was trustworthy, and I looked very innocent. So and here I am, a criminal justice major once again. And so that's what I started doing. Well, eventually I dropped out of school, and his wife needed a right-hand person, which she was addicted to heroin. So I would go to the store, I would babysit for her. He had a right-hand man, I was a right-hand person for his wife, and I would do the lab runs.
Who's watching your son? Your parents?
Most of the time my folks would watch him. I couldn't bring him, I was not allowed to bring him to the house, which I wouldn't have anyways. And he was also in preschool. And I could not take him on any of the lab runs, of course, anything like that. So yeah, he was probably at preschool at the time because my mom worked full time.
So when he got out of preschool, who would go pick him up?
Oh, I'd go pick him up.
So you pick him up, take him to your parents' house where your dad was.
Right.
So your dad was watching him.
No, my dad watched him sometimes, but not a lot. Mostly it was just my mom, or mostly he was with me. Most of the time when I picked him up, the thing was that boy never really had a babysitter. If I wasn't working for the lab, he was with me until he went to bed. And when he went to bed, then I would go out and party at the clubs, like Vista Entertainment Center, Vista E, the place to be, Bullies, all those. Hungry Hunter, they used to have ladies' night, so I would go to all those places. And finally, when he was about 5 years old, my mom said, get out. You know, she's like, get out of the house. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, you're unstable. We don't want you here. And by the way, we're keeping Andrew. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? You can't just throw me out and take my son. What kind of bullshit is that? And in my head, none of it made sense, you know, but it made sense now. And shortly thereafter, it made sense. So I kind of ended up, the guy I was working for at the lab, Donald, he ended up getting shot. He got kidnapped several times by the Hells Angels, and then he ended up getting shot. So that gig was over. So
Not dead?
Yeah, he was killed. And so it's a dangerous business being a cook. You know, like if you had those skills back in those days, people would kidnap you and force you to cook for them. You know what I mean? It was a little Breaking Bad back then. So it was like the Wild West.
It's interesting because, you know, my last guest on Cops and Convicts, need to check in. I'm fascinated by your story. Need to check in with our viewers. You are with us at the Cops and Convicts podcast. My guest today is Laura Murray. Please hit the subscribe button. Please smash that thumbs up button for your guy. My last guest is a made member of the Bonanno crime family. They wouldn't have went to the cook and tried to kidnap him. They just would have said, you're cooking for us.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't have a choice.
Right.
Because they wouldn't have killed him because he's of no use to them dead.
Right.
So I wonder why the Hells Angels just didn't strong arm him and say, you're cooking for us. We're not going to kidnap you. You're just going to cook for us right here.
Yeah, they would take him for a weekend. They would take him for a week, and then they would dump him back off up the street again. And he really, I said, well, did you want to go? He's like, hell no, I didn't want to go. You know, he's like, well, when they say get in the car, you get in the car, you know. And
just a really bad strategy on their part. They could have gotten what they wanted without doing all that.
Well, they're not exactly rocket scientists. I hate to say it, but you know, and he also had a little girl that was my son's age in that house. Oh. So sometimes one time I showed up and everybody was tied up with phone cords. And I came in, the door was kind of ajar, and I came in the house, they were gagged, they were tied up with phone cords. His right-hand man had a stab wound in his upper thigh, which I learned how to sew up. I guess that's how I learned to be a cleanup person. That was my first indoctrination. I remember them telling me use black thread because he has black hair on his legs. And I was like, okay, so.
How old are you at this point?
I was probably 19 or 20.
Okay, so you're not even legal, and you've witnessed all of this.
There was a lot of violence going on. There was a lot of violence that I witnessed, unfortunately, working there. Yeah.
So you're using drugs. You're trying to raise your son. You're a mule. Your source of income gets murdered. What do you do next?
Well, so I always worked at the fair, right? I worked at the state fair on the weekends. And when my mom took my son away, I was like, dang, I got to get a job. So I went back to the fairgrounds, the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and I don't know whether I had stopped doing meth. I felt like I had stopped doing it, and it was just smoking weed, because I don't remember. I might have had to UA for that job. I don't know. It seemed easy to stop doing drugs back then. It got harder the older I got, but so I went and applied for this job at the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and I got it. I became a part-time and then eventually a full-time state enforcement officer. I had my education, I had my transcripts, I had a weapons card, you know what I mean? So I got hired by the state.
To basically work security?
Yeah, it was just security, but it's as a state enforcement officer, you have quasi peace officer status as long as you're on the fairgrounds. So.
Was this seasonal?
No, this ended up being full-time. It was like a full-time temp though, but it was year-round. It wasn't just the fair. I had worked fair security before, part-time, And so they hired me as year round on the Del Mar Fairgrounds. So I drove a patrol car around year round.
So at this point, you had an AA from Palomar.
No, I didn't have it. I didn't get my AA. I dropped out. So yeah, so I got hired, and I know I was still doing meth because they gave me the graveyard shift. But what I did do is I went back and I got my son, because he did call me one time, and he was with my father, and he was scared, and I was able to talk to him through a window or something, and he told me he was scared, and that was it for me. That was it. I was not going to have my son exposed to the same thing that I had growing up. So I said, I'm going to come back and I'm going to get you, you know. And so I got that job, and I came back and I told my mom, I have a full-time job. I have a place to live. Please give me my son back. And she did. She gave him back, and I lived in a condo in Del Mar, off Del Mar Heights Road. Like, my comebacks are really good. That's the thing. My comebacks are really good, but when I get in trouble, I also get in real trouble. So I stayed in that condo in Del Mar and enrolled him in the school district so he could go to the Del Mar School District, which is one of the best in the county.
He's 5.
Yeah.
So who's watching him while you're working? I mean,
Well, here's the thing. So Andrew's my road dog. He's always been my road dog. And unfortunately, a lot of times I treated him more as my equal than, you know, than as a child. I was still very young, and I didn't understand, you know, that concept. I knew I loved that little boy with all my heart. I wanted him with all my heart. I would move heaven and earth for him. But I was also still a young woman and still an addict. So a lot of times he would go to work with me and ride in the patrol car, and then hang out with the guys at the Thoroughbred Club. They come in at 4 a.m. to feed the ducks and to clean up the grounds. And he would ride around on a little cart with him. Otherwise, I worked graveyard shift. So he a lot of times would stay at a neighbor's house all night, or my folks would take him at night just for, you know, when he would just go there and go to bed, and then I'd pick him up in the morning. So, I mean, I was a single parent. I didn't have a lot of resources for daycare, I remember. And he doesn't remember a lot from those days, but he really loves the racetrack. He's like, I had so much fun on that racetrack because everyone took care of him. You know, it was a big family there, and he was a very well-behaved, savvy young guy. You know, he was very well-behaved for a little boy, you know. So I did that. Well, what happened was I started having an affair with my supervisor. So he was much older, and he's actually the one that hired me. And he started picking up on me, and all this stuff happened, and I ended up having an affair with him, and that affair went wrong. And when it came time for full-time hires, I was not hired by the civil service. I didn't hire him. I believe, well, yeah, because he broke up with me. He got back with his wife, and that was the end. So, like, I'm terrible with relationships. I know that now. I don't even want to be in a relationship now because I feel like my picker is broken, you know. So
yeah, you're not alone there though. So
yeah. So so I ended up just working for the concessions, being a stand manager, still worked at the racetrack, still brought my son with me. My mom still, you know, and he adores my mother. He and my mother have a completely different relationship than my mother and I had. And even my father has a different relationship with them. You know, he had the sun set around him. My mom said he was perfect. You know, he's different than you kids. He's perfect, you know. And so they just adored him, you know. And he was.
You didn't get hired. You didn't get hired. So then what happened to you?
So then Andrew went back to living with my folks for a while. I went back to couch surfing for a while. Let's see what happened after that. That was the 80s. I really forget what happened. I know he stayed at the Del Mar School District until he graduated 6th grade. And so I pulled myself back up working the concessions at the Del Mar Fair and racetrack and all the events. And I got an apartment in Cardiff. So in the meantime, to supplement my income and as an excuse the thing was he went to the Del Mar School District and I felt really bad because all his friends' dads were like lawyers and doctors. And I would see the equipment they had because my son played Pee Wee football every year. I had to get him in sports. I was a single parent and I felt like I had that social construct of gender so set in my head. And I thought, he needs to be around men. He's going to have to navigate through a man's world. And he got a woman for a mother, so he needs to be around men. So I had him in snuffy basketball, little league, he played every year. Football, he played every year. He ran track with my dad because my dad was a track coach too. And so I had him in all these sports, but the kids had such good equipment. And I felt bad because I'm like, don't you want those new Japanese cleats? And he's like, no, I'm fine. I like my old cleats. They're comfortable. And I'm like, no, I want you to have better stuff than that. And in my head, I was thinking he needs better, and he didn't care. He didn't want better. But so I started selling meth out of the apartment in Del Mar, out of the condo in Del Mar. That's what had happened. And before I knew it, I had the whole fairgrounds hooked. And so I had one runner that would come and get it. So there wasn't traffic going in and out. And Andrew really liked the guy, Uncle Mikey. So that was the person that was starting to do that. But once I thought about it, I thought, it wasn't him that was demanding all those things. It was me, it was me thinking in my head that he needed better equipment and he didn't. So I guess that was just kind of an excuse. And another thing that kind of hurt me later was he had come home, I guess, because, this is Del Mar and my son is half black, and he had come home and said some kids were teasing him because his hair was nappy, and that just like broke me. That made me think of why were there no black people in my school? Why is there no black people in this district? And again, and as a white person, I can't tell him how he feels, right? I can't tell him how he feels. I can explain to them that those people are nobodies, and to make themselves feel better, they're teasing him. I can tell them the psychology of it, but that was the first time I've seen it from someone else's perspective, and I was really, and it happened again, and my son, mind you, he doesn't understand the concept of race. So that really just kind of drove home what kind of the areas seem nice, the people seem nice unless you're different. And
how old was he when that happened?
He was about 8.
So you and I have multiple things in common, and so do your son and I. As an adult, I'm able to pinpoint the moment that I realized that I was black. And it was when I was in Catholic grade school. I was older than 8. I was probably 11. And I was the only black kid in the class.
Yeah.
They were asking me what's wrong with my hair. Up to that point, I didn't know anything was wrong with my hair.
Yeah, there is nothing wrong with your hair.
Right. So, but when I look back, that was the moment that I realized that I was black. And if you ask your son today, if he's ever given that any thought, you'll probably be able to trace it back to when people were asking him about his physical features when he never paid any attention to his physical features. And I was going to ask you what life was like for this little half black, half white boy living in the area that you lived in, because I know the area that you live in, not as well as you. And I was also going to ask you, did anyone ever say anything to you about your little half and half boy?
The thing with Andrew is he's white passing. So besides his hair, he has freckles like me. But I have blue eyes. His eyes are completely black. You cannot even see the pupil in his eyes, and he thinks that's really cool. But besides that, he's white passing. So the thing is that was very confusing for me is, first of all, I had no awareness. And second of all, I don't think he had awareness, like you said, until then, but he passed and no one ever thought his hair was loose curled until he started getting into his teen years. His hair was just really loose curled. He has freckles. And we would actually, one time, I made the mistake of hanging out with some of the carnival people at the fair because my friend's like, let's go hang out with the carnies. And I'm like, I don't know, they're kind of a dicey bunch. And she's like, no, let's go. And Andrew was with us. And the guy started using the N-word, and he was so mad and so venomous when he was using it that he was shaking. And I looked down at Andrew, and Andrew looked up at me, and I said, we have to go. We have to go right now. And I left, and he's like, that was scary. Your friend Grizzly is scary. I said, I know, he's scary. I don't think my son knew it wasn't scary because of the word, but it was the venom that this guy spoke with that terrified him, and then my son, he's like, what is that word? I'm like, you don't need to know that word. I didn't even explain anything. He was only 3 or 4, I made a lot of mistakes, as far as his identity went. Since his father never came around, since he never saw that side of the family, since he grew up in North County, he was never even exposed to a different culture or ethnicity besides Hispanic. But when his hair started to get more than curly, I don't know if you ever heard of this place, and you're probably gonna laugh at me, but there's a barber shop in Oceanside, and it was called Unisex House of Style. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
So it was an all black barber shop. So the only way that I knew to take him around people that would know about his hair was to take him, because, at that point I was still dating Marines. They went to Unisex House of Style, and I would hang out with them there. So I knew the barbers, nice, friendly guys. They knew what they were doing. So I would take him to Unisex House of Style, and they'd be like, just leave the boy here. We got him. We got this. So they would teach him about his hair. They would cut his hair. He'd have fun at the barbershop. You know what the barbershops used to be like, right? I don't know whether they're still like that, but he had a good time, and he was able to laugh and joke with the guys. And so, I mean, that was really the only experience that I ever gave him as far as that went, and he had a good time. I could actually leave him at this barbershop for like 2 hours and come back, and he'd still be sitting there in the chair talking away to the guys.
Yeah, nothing has changed when you talk about culture. Barbershops are a pretty important part of Black American culture to this day. Nothing has changed. People are younger, but when I was growing up, my grandfather would leave the house and go to the barbershop and stay there all day. He didn't need a haircut.
Yeah.
He'd play checkers all day and talk shit all day.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm sorry. I know you guys aren't babysitters. There's like, no, he can stay here.
Right, exactly.
He can stay here he's a well-behaved boy. He could stay here all day. You know what I mean? And they talked about, soldiers and this and that and Marines, and he loved all that talk. So he sat there all day, but that's where I would take him. And I felt like he would come bouncing out of there with, new confidence and new pride. And you know what I mean? It wasn't like those little snotty kids in Del Mar. You know what I mean? I'm like, see, I told you everything's cool. And he's like, yeah. Like he was full of himself when he came out of there. So I was happy about that. But so let me go back to, I was living in Cardiff. I was working concessions. I was a stand manager.
Lost your job because of the affair. Now you're back to selling meth.
Well, no, I lost my job, but I got back on my feet and became a stand manager and got another apartment,
Okay.
in Cardiff. But this was the decline of it all. I had run into that guy's wife, the one that had been killed. And I don't know what I was going through, but she used to do what they called chasing the dragon. And so she's like, do you want to try it? Because before that, I'm like, no, I never want to try heroin. I don't want to do heroin. I don't want nothing to do with heroin. And I tried it. And of course, I got sick as a dog and I couldn't stand it and this and that. But then the seed had been planted. You know what I mean? That seed had been planted, that kind of opiate thing. And so I had started hanging out with my boss. I got a job as a sous chef, moved up the ranks in concessions, got a job as a sous chef. And my boss one day said, hey, there's a good concert. You want to go? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go. And he bought me a beer. Well, someone had spotted me drinking a beer and I got fired for drinking at work. It was the fair, right? My boss bought it for me. I'm like, but Bobby bought it for me. They're like, we don't care. We don't. And he's kept his job. He was drinking a beer too. So I don't know. It was a bad, the thing is I don't think I was doing right. So maybe it was bad karma. I don't know what it was. So I lost that job and I lost the apartment. And my folks once again came and picked up Andrew. I think he was 12. And they said, once again, you're on your own. We're taking him, and if you get it together, you can get him back. Well, that was the spiral down for me. Then I started actively looking for people to get heroin from. I'm like, I'd only done it that one time, but that had planted the seed. And instead of pulling myself up, I just spiraled down.
I'm curious. The first time you tried heroin, it made you sick as a dog. What was the positive vibe from getting sick as a dog that you would want to do it again?
I was a very self-destructive person for one thing. And I think although I was sick as a dog, it was the worst thing that I could do. And I don't know why I headed for that. And then there was also a very euphoric feeling, like you just didn't care about anything. You had no feelings. There was that kind of feeling. And I wanted to numb everything.
So you're hooked on heroin now?
Well, no, I just started dibbling and dabbling in it, but that only lasts for so long. And then I just started living like on the 101 strip there in Leucadia, going from house to house. Every once in a while I would stay at my folks' house when they would take off on a trip, overseas or something. They traveled a lot. So I would stay with Andrew, and I would try and get clean. And my dad paid for a medical detox. And I would get clean and then it just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't stick. I'd overdosed probably twice where, Narcan had to be distributed and it had actually been over 5 minutes that I was gone and I still came back. And it had just gone from bad to worse and it continued until finally, I was buying from these guys in Encinitas and their driver ended up sick or something happened to him, family emergency, I don't know. And so they said, we'll give you $50 if you drive for us today. And I was like, okay, well, I spoke Spanish too, right? So that helps. And so my friend's like, just do it. Just go where they tell you to go. And you'll get paid at the end of the day. And I was like, okay. So I drove and I did what I was supposed to do. I didn't ask any questions. I did not steal. And I did that. And they really liked me, so they're like, hey, you want to work on the weekends for us? It's all day, and I'm like, we'll pay you this and that. I'm like, yeah, sure. So I kept doing it and I kept doing it. And I ended up doing that for 4 years and I ended up being the trainer. So every 3 months, they would have somebody come from Mexico and I would train them on how to do the job, how to distribute the heroin throughout the day. I ended up, since I was the only one that was an American citizen, renting all the houses, the stash houses. buying the cars, insuring the cars, getting the tires for the cars, the maintenance for the cars, disciplining the runners, making sure, doing customer service, all that kind of thing. And after 4 years, that's what I had turned into, working. And
so you're transporting between Mexico and the United States?
no, I did not do any of the border things. I was just a trainer. So I trained for the cart. It turned out it was a cartel. And I trained for them. I ended up those last couple of years being a trainer. So I would drive and I would train the boys on how to behave and how to deal the heroin. In the meantime, supporting my habit. And I would get arrested every once in a while. And I would also call a friend and tell my friend, you tell those guys they better bail me out within 1 day, or I swear to God, my tongue will get real loose. And they bail me out like that. Now, I would never say anything, but that was my threat. I'm like, you better get me out of here because I'm sick as a dog. And so, and the police would always ask me, who are you working for? Who you're doing this for? And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea. And it was kind of stupid because the DEA had been watching us that whole time. They had 18,000 pages of wiretaps and transcripts, and I was all over it.
So I'm assuming this is what got you incarcerated.
The first time.
So how many times have you been locked up?
So this is what got me in a federal prison, and it gave me a 60-month sentence. The second time,
60 months.
Yeah. And the second time was for bank robbery. And it was a series of bank robberies. And that was 8 years. And that was state prison.
All right.
So I've been.
So your first stay, when the first time you were arrested, you were in a holding cell. So you were in like county jail, city jail, correct?
County, yeah.
Right. So that was just a couple of days or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
well, actually, the first time I got arrested was because my friend couldn't drive his car because he had an expired registration sticker. And so I told him, don't worry, I got this. So I took a smiley face sticker that I had nearby, and I made it was yellow that year. And so the smiley face sticker was yellow and black. So I got an X-Acto blade and I made kind of like a crude registration sticker because the cops would just cruise through the alley. There was a dirty cop in Encinitas. His name was Morgan. And he would cruise through those alleys, and then he would shake you down for all your weed and all your drugs, and he would let you go. But if you didn't have anything, he'd take your car. And so if he saw that those tags were expired, so I made it just so you could see in the dark, if you glanced at it. It wasn't a good job, but I guess he looked quicker, and then he went and asked the guy, and the guy rats me out, and they come to the bar and pick me up because we were staying at a hotel. And he arrested me for manufacturing a stateless thing. So that was the first time.
How long were you locked up for that?
Just 3 days.
Okay.
But it was Las Colinas.
All right. So you were in and out of, you got arrested for a couple of minor things here and there, but then you get sent to federal prison.
Well, what happened was on June 15th, I believe it was 1998 or 99, the DEA did a nationwide in 37 different states called Operation Tar Pit. And when they did Operation Tar Pit, they busted thousands of people across all these states. There was 247 in the Southern District where I was from that they busted for this conspiracy. It was the largest heroin conspiracy. I didn't even know that. I thought we were like in 3 states. I didn't know it was a cartel. It was a huge thing. And so on that day, they busted everybody. But on that day, I was already sitting in county jail for trafficking for them on just a charge by myself. Because of course, I'm never going to say, you know what I mean, what I never told on anyone, so I would just ride the beef myself. Well, I'm in there and I'm like, man, everybody got taken down. I'm watching my bosses on TV get arrested. And so I'm like, dang, they're going to federal prison. That's crazy. Like I'm watching it. And then like 3 days later, they're like, roll it up. You have court. I'm like, no, I don't have court. And they're like, yeah, you got court. Shut up and cuff up. And I'm like, no, I don't have court, sir. I go to court in Vista. And he's like, no, you're going to downtown today. So I sat there in a holding cell all day and I heard these chains and they're like, Murray, step out. So I step out and there's the US Marshals with the windbreakers. And I'm like, oh no. Oh no. And I'm like, why are you guys picking me up? They're like, you'll find out. Took me to the federal courthouse, waited there all day with all these strange women. And I'm wearing my San Diego County Jail blues. And they're dressed in clothes from San Bernardino, from MCC, from all these federal holdings going to court in San Diego. And I'm like, oh, this isn't, they're like, what are you here for? I'm like, I have no idea. The very last person, because it was a sealed indictment, even the federal defender had no idea. And then they charged me with 23 counts of conspiracy, weapons charges, and they put me on a bus and they took me to San Bernardino. Never went back to San Diego County Jail. I was wearing my blues. My property was there. I had money on my books there.
So 1998, you're 36 years old at this point.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you first got arrested? The first time you got arrested?
Oh, I think I was like 34 or something like that.
Oh, okay. So from age 20 to 34, you were good at not getting caught.
Right. And because I think, my lawyers are always like, dang, you just look like such a nice person. You just look so amiable. You know what I mean? Like that makes me the perfect criminal, I guess.
Listen, it does. It really does. You're female, you're white. And the statistics in the state of California show that the most, it's the Racial Identity Profiling Act, and it's information collected by the police officers themselves across the state of California when they pull somebody over.
Right, it's the little cards, they fill out.
Right.
Yeah.
So Middle Eastern and Asian people are the least likely to get pulled over and the least likely to get searched. Black people are the most likely to get pulled over and the most likely to get searched. And yet white people are the most likely to actually have contraband on them.
Exactly. Highest rate to have contraband on them. I mean, and in San Diego, they just did 4 years ago, they did a report and they showed that the San Diego Police Department was not targeting to pull over, but once they were pulled over, they were most likely to search a black man. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but here's the thing. I mean, subconsciously or consciously, if you know that the chances of you getting pulled over are low, it really does give you license, you would think. It's like, okay, I can do this. They're not going to bother me. And
well, no, at the time, I didn't even think that.
Not you.
Yeah.
I'm saying generally speaking.
Yeah.
Because.
Well, I know my bosses thought that. They thought that I was perfect for the job because they're not going to pull over they're not going to pull over a white person. So they really liked me in that job.
Right. And compared to now, most of your police officers were overwhelmingly white men. Overwhelmingly. Right. So you were a great mule. you were great. And you didn't talk. You didn't rat anybody out. So when they indicted you on 23 counts and they sent you to San Bernardino, you stayed there until you went to trial.
No, I actually became a management problem of all things. And what they did do is they put me on bus therapy. If you're familiar or anybody's familiar with bus therapy, it's if you're a management problem, if you piss the wrong person off, they will put you on a bus and they will send you from detention center to detention center. You may sit there 24 hours in booking. You may sit there 48 hours in booking. you may sit there for a week or two, and then they roll you up again and they take you to another place. So I was in, I think, 5 different. So I went from San Bernardino to Wackenhut to MCC to CCA and back to San Bernardino again that entire time. Yeah, I was not a good inmate.
Let me ask you this, before you got locked up, this drug lifestyle that you were living, you were taking heroin and you were transporting it. Were you making a lot of money?
I wasn't making any money because I was a heroin addict. So even if I made money, I didn't handle it correctly and didn't know what to do with it and thought every day was my last. So I just spent it like I spent it. But and my living situation was very unstable. I worked part-time jobs, like I worked graveyard shift jobs, but it was still very hard because what had happened was, because I was a citizen, when things happened, when someone would get stabbed or someone would get shot, or there was some kind of emergency, my boss would blow up the pager and I had to respond. And if I didn't respond, they would come by my job. They would come by where I'm living. And they're like, hey, there's some Hispanics here to see you. And I'm like, damn it, I told you guys not to come by here. And so that kind of instability, it didn't matter. Like all the money was just blown on either stupid stuff or I didn't invest it. I saved it at one point, but I blew it. And then the kind of trauma that I experienced, I re-traumatized myself time and time again. There were robberies, there were stabbings, there were shootings. I had a connection to a clinic where I could take the people who were not documented. And I refuse to call them illegals and I refuse to call them undocumented aliens. These were people. These were nice guys that came from one town down in Mexico who had never been exposed to this before. And this was their way of making money. So I would take them to a clinic where they could get antibiotics for that stab wound or get help, because it was a very dangerous profession,
So when you were sentenced to 5 years?
Yeah. So originally I was looking at 260 months because I had the state priors for trafficking.
Right.
So they were going to consider those state priors. By then I was going back and forth between state court, federal court, state court, federal court. And if they had convicted me of the state crimes before the federal crimes, they could have given me that 260 months. So I ended up with an amazing federal attorney because they had actually run out of federal defenders. There was 37 people just on my case in San Diego. So they ran out of federal defenders. So I ended up with a private attorney, and this private attorney she was wonderful. And so she ended up telling my state lawyer, please put off her convictions as long as you can, and we'll do what we can, on the Fed side to get her the lowest, because they have the 10-year minimum. They have,
Right.
They have the 85% at the time. There was no halftime or anything like that. And, I was looking at a lot of time, and out of all the women who the rest were just wives and girlfriends, I was the only one there because of me. I wasn't there because of a boyfriend or because of a husband, and when I got to federal prison, the counselor said, who's the man? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Who's the man? Like the feds? I don't know. And she's like, no, who's the man that got you in here? And I said, well, there wasn't any man that got me in here. Unfortunately, I got myself in here. And that was the mindset as far as women go in there.
So the women that were locked up because their men were making them do stuff.
Well, because
that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I don't think the men were making them, but I think they were just like ride or die with their partners, you know what I mean?
Okay,
So-
okay.
And their partners were making more money. See, nobody else was a user too. These people did not use heroin. They came from a specific town in Tepic, Nayarit, Mexico, and that town's trade was heroin. Other towns did pottery, other towns did cattle. This town, and you can read about it in a book by, his last name is Quinones, and it's called Dreamland. And he talks about how our cartel, once the opiate epidemic started, our cartel mixed with it like pizza delivery guys. And when you couldn't afford Oxycontin anymore, you just went to our $10 bags of heroin. And so our cartel is actually talked about in that book and how it had an impact with the opium epidemic.
What was the name of your cartel?
It was the Areola brothers.
Okay. So
different from the Ariano, completely different, but it was
so when they handed you down your sentence, what went through your mind?
I was actually so relieved. I couldn't tell you that I got that sentence, because I had you know what I mean? I was looking at a serious amount of time. It took 16 months for me to even get sentenced, because for one thing, I had to separate from my other defendants. I had to separate from them. And then, you know, they started releasing the transcripts and my name came up more and more and more. And I seemed to have, and then they would transfer money down to Mexico, 10,000 at a time through, what's that wire service?
Western Union.
Western Union. Well, whose name was on the Western Union thing? The one who had the California driver's license, me. Wow. So my name kept coming up and my lawyer's like, I'll tell you when to plead, because it's getting worse and worse. Your name keeps coming up, you know, and I was like, okay. So she was very savvy about that process. It was really dicey. So when they offered me that 57 months, and they had been watching us for 4 years. I mean, all the pictures, all the videos, I hated seeing all that stuff. I was like, God, I was stupid. And so when they offered me 57 months, I jumped at it and I considered it, you know.
Did you do this because it was an easy way to make money?
I did it because I was addicted to heroin. and because it was a challenge. Honestly, for me, it was a challenge. It's strange to say that, but I got very good at it. I got good at being able to judge people. I got good at being able to sense danger. I mean, the DEA was like, do you know how many times you almost got your head blown off? I'm like, I know, right? I don't even know, because they were supposed to lock the door when they got out of the vehicle. But when they didn't unlock the door, I knew someone was coming for me and I would just tear off. Well, the DEA had been watching that, except for the times I got stabbed. I'm like, where were you guys then? They're like, oh, that was Easter Sunday. We were off.
How many times have you been stabbed?
It was twice on that job. It was twice. I got stabbed right here. They were trying to hit my chest and I went back and they hit my arm. And then someone came at me with a tree saw and he had it at my neck, but I put my hand on the steering wheel to get the horn. And so he slashed out at my hand and got my hand pretty good. And they took off and the police
they were trying to steal the heroin from you.
Yeah. So I was a target for that. But see, I was also known for never giving it up. You had to kill me first. And a lot of them didn't have the guts to kill me. But there was also a problem with the Mexican mafia constantly going after us and trying to tax us. And I wouldn't allow them, I wouldn't give in for any tax. And as a matter of fact, I would talk crap to them and it was not wise, because I got back to the stash house and the guy's wife is crying and packing. And I'm like, ¿Qué te pasa? You know, like, what's happening? And they're like, you're so stupid. You know, who did you just tell they couldn't have the taxes at Chuck E. Cheese? It was at Chuck E. Cheese. It was a kid's birthday party. And there was the Mexican mafia was one of them was one of their soldiers was at the party and they told me, you know, you're going to pay taxes. They had my runner I grabbed my runner back and I told him, you know, pretty much F you, I'm not paying any taxes, go to hell. And by the time we got back, they had already threatened to blow up the entire stash house, and they had to move. They had to move quickly. I had to get another house. Like, we were constantly dodging them, but I'd like to think I was pretty tough with the business side of it. So
for those just tuning in, you're watching Cops and Convicts. My guest today is Laura Murray, and please hit the subscribe button. Please smash that thumbs up button for your guy. This is a fascinating portion of our time together, because Laura is describing how she got sentenced to 57 months in federal prison. And what I want to ask you, Laura, is what was your time like in federal prison as a female?
So this would be the early 2000s. And it was in federal prison in Cocoa County, which is Contra Costa County, and Dublin FCI. I really don't have anything to compare it to the male experience, but I'd say we were treated a different way. Like I said, they asked who the man was that got me into prison. They assumed that most women were in conspiracies and cartels and had gotten into these things because of men. And that was the first time in my mind that there was something gendered about this, you know, that there was a different pathway to crime for women than there is for men. So, and I believe the female prison, at least this federal prison, didn't have a lot of politicking that would normally go on in the men's federal prison, where, you know, the races are divided up, and that kind of thing didn't go on. I also noticed in federal prison that there weren't the gangs that there were in state prison, and simply because you were lucky if you came from the US, or not lucky, it depended. So there was people from all over the world. There was a huge group of Jamaican citizens, a large group of South American citizens, Cubans. But what I really noticed and have been thinking about was the large group of Native American women. Huge population in federal prison is the group of Native American women. And then powwows were allowed. And so the elders would come in, the family members would come in, and they would have these beautiful powwows in the rec barn, you know, and they were allowed all cultural liberties for these powwows, and they had sweat lodges on the rec grounds. And it made me think, like, why are there so many Native American women in federal prison?
Did you find out why?
Well, mostly because the feds are in charge of all the reservation land.
Okay,
And
so why lock them up? Like, what were their charges?
Yeah, so they would never be in state prison. They would always be in federal prison because they're under federal domain. But why there is a large number of them, the crimes that they were in, they weren't your huge cartels. They were like drunk driving. They were drugs. It's just, yeah, now, of course, it smacks of racial disparity, you know, now when I look at it. But at the time, I couldn't fathom. I believe there were no Native Americans at my school or in my area when I grew up. So to me, again, of course, that's a platform of entitlement, is what my friends tell me. But yeah, I mean, the prison was had a huge number, a huge population, and the treatment there was no treatment, you know, for that, for any drugs or alcohol or anything like that. There was a federal DAP, they called it a DAP program, drug and alcohol program, but you had to fit the criteria. And most of the time, if you're a short timer, you didn't fit that criteria.
So which prison did you do most of your 57-month sentence? What
There, after doing 16 months in pretrial, I spent my entire time at Dublin FCI.
Was that male and female in that prison?
They had just stopped the male and female, so it was only a female prison. And that was on a military base called Camp Parks.
So at Dublin, this place that you described, there was no racial segregation. There wasn't a lot of there was no gang stuff. There wasn't politicking there. It was just do your time and get along with folks. Right.
But the thing is they were very culturally aware. I mean, they had the Native American month. They had celebrations for Jamaicans. They had South American celebrations. But it just trips me out now to think that kind of thing, it was allowed. They weren't worried about people bringing stuff in, I guess. They weren't worried about that, but they were very culturally aware in this prison. And it was
female prison.
Yeah. Well, I heard they had the powwow in the men's prisons too, though. The women talked about their husbands having the powwows too, but maybe they were a little more restrictive in that. But I mean, it seemed like this prison really went out of its way to be to promote cultural diversity. And they also would let the children come in. They would let the children come in for a day and spend a day in a certain part of the prison with the parents, which I thought was like a wonderful thing.
What was the most stressful part about that prison sentence for you?
Let's see. The most stressful part, I believe, was not doing any drugs, and the violence that I had just experienced had came back with a vengeance at me when I started having night terrors in this prison. And I started walking and I started pulling bunks off the wall. And that's not me. Like, you know, when I'm not addicted to drugs, I am absolutely not a violent person. I'm like a big golden retriever, you know, but at night, you know, I woke up one morning and my bunkies were terrified, you know, and I'm like, why are you looking at me that way? What happened? And they're like, you tried to pull Alicia off the bunk last night. And I'm like, no, why? You know, I like Alicia. And they were like, no, we don't want you back in this cell until you go see a counselor right now, because it was really terrifying for us.
How many people were in your cell?
2. So there was 3 of us all together.
Okay.
So yeah, apparently, I mean, I'd gotten very violent, you know, and that was really concerning. So I had to put in, you know, a slip to see a counselor right away, you know, and my poor bunkies were like, you know, if that happens again, we're going to ask you, to leave the cell and this and that. And I had a pretty cushy cell. I liked my cell, you know, the girls were, you know, easy to live with. And, you know, so it was those night terrors and just basically the aftermath of everything that I'd been through and things that I'd seen, you know, working for that cartel, that I had to work through that. There was a really good program called Pathways. That was a pilot program in there. And I was accepted to that, and they addressed violence. And I was really shocked at the amount of women that were there and the amount of women that had experienced violence and sexual abuse as children. All of a sudden I realized I wasn't alone, you know, and all of a sudden it clicked in my head that we're not here by coincidence. You know, the amount of women that have been, you know, violently abused and even emotionally abused is, you know, there's over 85% of us in there, you know, people that have these so-called normal childhoods and all this other stuff, you know, they don't end up in prison, you know, so it's not a coincidence, you know. And of course, you know, the racial disparities that I witnessed in state prison was, you know, I mean, that was shocking also. So
you've often mentioned your mom. Where was your mom in all this? When you got sentenced, what was that conversation like with her? Because up to this point, everything you've told me about your mom is like, well, you made your bed, you got to go lie in it. Was she the same way with prison?
Yeah, pretty much. But the thing is that my folks aren't gonna leave me either. You know what I mean? They're not gonna disown me. They may not call the cops. They may say, you know, you made this decision. You're gonna have to live with you know, with the aftermath of it. But guess what? They came to visit me, and guess what? They sent me like 25, 50 bucks a month, you know, for canteen. And out of all the people that I knew in my life, nobody else did that. You know, my folks did that. It's dysfunctional as our relationship has been. You know, they don't leave you. You know what I mean? So they came in to visit me, not often, you know, maybe once or twice during that sentence, and they picked
Really?
me up. Yeah, they picked me up. I called every Sunday night after Sunday dinner, and I talked to them. You know, I was sober at that point, you know, and my mom and I, of course, get along much better when I'm sober. So yeah, I was sober at that point, and they supported me. And when I went to parole and go to San Diego County, my mom is like, you know, I think you should come up to. They had since moved out of North County, and they said, I think you should move to Northern California and live near or with us. So
But when did you get paroled? You had a 57-month sentence. How many of those months did you actually serve?
So I did a drug program. It was called the DAP. I did the DAP program, which I really, unfortunately, I don't think I learned that much from it, but, and I was allowed to parole 18 months early, but you had to spend a year in the halfway house or 6 months in a halfway house with no violations, and then they would give you your year off. So the closest, by then my folks lived in Northern California in a small town called Chico. And yeah, oh, Chico. So, but the closest federal halfway house was in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. So I didn't know anything about San Francisco. Like, I'd been there a couple of times as a tourist, but I'm like, I don't want to live in San Francisco. I don't want to live in the Tenderloin. I don't want to, you know, like, I was very resistant. I begged my father to just let me go to Mexico and live the rest of my life. When they picked me up, please don't take me to this halfway house. And my mom's like, no, you're going to go and you're going to do well. And that's the end of it. So they dropped me off at this place in the Tenderloin. And it was called Cornell Corrections. And that place, it had a mix of probationers. It had men from the Muriel boat lift from the federal prison in Florida. It had such a mix of people there that it was just a really, it was like being dropped into a different universe. And so
I would imagine.
Yeah. So, and you know, and I'd been sober like all this time. I may have drank a little hooch in federal prison, but that was about it. I never went back to heroin. So yeah, I was there at that halfway house. And once again, I thrived. I not only within 2 weeks had a job working at I forget what the park was called, but it's where the Giants play. It was Pac Bell Park, but I don't know what it's called now.
Me neither.
And so, yeah, the first time I worked a Rolling Stones concert, and I was just walking through the concert. My little badge got me everywhere, backstage with the Stones, the whole thing. And I'm like, man, I think I died and gone to heaven. And then the World Series happened. So I got to work the entire World Series. They thought I was such a great worker. I'd work concessions, remember? So I know how to work out of a till really fast, even though I'm not supposed to be anywhere near alcohol because it's a condition of your supervised release or whatever the feds call it now. I was, you know, selling beer and wine at concerts. I was working, you know, the park as a porter, you know, and these guys that had worked there for like 30 years are like, come on, kid, let's go. And so I'd pick all the cardboard up for them. And it was just, I had the time of my life. And then I got a really good job, not only was it fun for me, but I got half the halfway house working there. And so the employment guy is like, I don't know what you're doing, but you're going to have my job pretty soon. So it was just I remember it as a really good time. It's stressful there because you can also get in trouble for whatever anyone else does too. And somebody had been drinking in my room, but I wasn't drinking, and they busted into the room and they wanted to send me back to federal prison too. And I'm like, but I haven't even been drinking. So that was a whole stressful thing, but I managed to get out of that. But then I started working at a place called BFI, just sorting recycling at this huge recycling plant in San Carlos. And they liked me so much, they said, we'll hire you full time. So I said, well, my time's almost up here. I'm supposed to go back. I have to go to Chico. And so I met with my federal probation officer, and I'm like, so here's how it's going to work. I'm going to work during the week in San Francisco and take the train up every weekend, so I'll still be living here, but that's a really good job down there. And she's like, well, I'm going to tell you how it's going to work. You're going to quit that job in San Francisco and you're going to move up here and find another job. And I'm like, but it's freaking Chico. Like, I have a felony. How am I possibly going to get a job up here? So I did. I mean, I had to do right what I'm told. I just started my supervised release. I was technically paroled. So I went up there and I went to the only recyclery plant.
This is in Chico.
In Chico, yeah, the recyclery plant was in Oroville because there's really no businesses, just brick and mortar in Chico. And I, once again, was living with my parents. My son was a El Dorado County sheriff by then. He had come to see me in federal prison, and he wore his little El Dorado sheriff polo shirt, and I just think he's the handsomest guy there is, right? And so he comes in, and the guard tells him, you may not want to wear that shirt because, you can be targeted. You can target whoever you're visiting could get beat up or something. And my son said, do you know who my mother is? And then it was funny because I worked for that cop at night on the graveyard shift. And so he's like, do you know who my mother is? And the cop's like, no, who is it? And he's like, it's Murray. And he goes, oh no, just go. Just go. Like, he didn't even, once he found out who it was, he's like, no one's going to bother your mom. So, yeah.
So you're in Chico.
Huh?
You're in Chico at this point.
Yeah. So I'm in that happened in the federal prison, but now I'm in Chico. My son's still a sheriff. And let's see what else. Oh, no, he wasn't still a sheriff. What had happened was, in the meantime, 9/11 had happened, and he was a National Guard. And like his first week as sheriff, he got deployed because of 9/11. So he was on a base in Washington. But yeah, so I go to Chico. I actually get a job at NorCal Waste Systems doing the same thing that I did down there. And everything seems to be going really great. I start making money. I'm in a union, still living with my folks, but I decide that it's okay for me to drink as long as I don't use illegal drugs. Like, it's okay to drink. So I didn't drink a lot. Alcohol is never really my thing, but I wasn't completely sober. I was sober off drugs, but not. So I worked there for I got into a relationship, which was not a really good relationship. Of course, everybody could have predicted that. It was with a former bank robber. He had paroled. I met him at the parole office. Not a good place to find dates.
I was just about to.
Yeah.
I was just about to say.
So we had to talk to our parole agents, and my parole agent made me tell him that I was a former cartel worker and that I still had contracts out. I had to tell my parents there were still some contracts out on me. Although as my assessment, they weren't a threat. They weren't a threat anymore because I didn't bring anybody down. I didn't rat anybody off, that wasn't already locked up and doing their time. Like, they're, you know what I mean? Like that. Those are the kind of hits where they come after you even after you get out of prison. Well, I hadn't done any of those things. So, but I still had to tell my parents, listen, I still have like a couple green lights, and that mostly was from the Mexican mafia, but I think because I was disrespectful to them. But, you know, that kind of thing falls to the wayside too, and they have bigger fish to fry after years. And so, yeah, I got with this person and he was a drinker and it was not a good relationship. I ended up moving in with him in a little house in a town called Paradise, which you may be familiar with the town Paradise because it burnt, the entire town burnt down some years ago.
Right.
So he gets really abusive, you know, we go back and forth. He finally gets locked up on a violation, which was actually a relief for me. So he's gone and I ended up buying the house up in Paradise. It was a beautiful little house up in the woods in the Sierra Nevadas, and it had a rental house next door to it. So I thought this is a good investment, but guess what? Like I bought it right at the height of the market before the subprime mortgage crisis. I had been working, I was about 3 months away from being vested in the union, the operating engineers union. I had gone to hazmat school, so I now worked for the hazmat part of NorCal Waste Systems. I had gotten the highest score of the entire class, in which I was totally shocked in this hazmat class. And my supervisor's like, why did so-and-so, the supervisor in Yuba City, get a 60 and you got like a 98%? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, yeah, I don't know either. And he was like mad about it, but I was like, whatever, I got my certificate now. And so, yeah, I was driving heavy equipment by then. I had certificates for heavy equipment, hazmat, and then the recession hit. And they ended up laying 8 of us, calling us all into the break room and laying 8 of us off at once. And it was devastating. Like people were crying and screaming in the break room. Like I tried really hard to get another job. I just bought the house. My loan started to get switched from company to company. You know, it went from JP Morgan to Chase to, or no, they were the same, but to Wells Fargo, to all these different things.
It was Washington Mutual.
Yeah, Washington Mutual. Freaking Washington Mutual.
Yeah,
that was the bank. Yeah, so there was 5 major lenders that participated in that. And so, yeah, Washington Mutual, I forgot about those dirty dogs. And so they all started like playing. What they did was, I found out later, they were like gambling on Blacks, single women, veterans. They were gambling that we were going to lose our mortgage. So they would trade these mortgages, and they had the derivatives going on, which was also a big fake thing. They were doing everything illegal. Well, I was struggling to keep that house. And then my renter, who is a little mentally unstable, I think, a tree fell across her driveway and it shut her electricity off for 2 days. I myself didn't have electricity. So she claimed the place was inhabitable and stopped paying rent. So in the middle of me being laid off, in the middle of me struggling to try and figure out these loans, this predatory loan that I had taken out, this woman stops paying rent and I can't do anything to her. I, who came from a cartel, who's done time in prison, cannot lay my hands on her and cannot even say a bad word to her. I have to, for another $500, hire someone to evict her. And in the meantime, keep my mouth shut and keep my eyes down. And so that was super stressful for me because I'm like, this lady's living in my property. She's breaking me. She's got to go.
I went through the same thing, Laura. I lost my house. I had a squatter in my house.
Yeah. And it was, you know, and to know what we know and come from where we come from and then not be able to do anything about it. I was going through it. I mean, I used to have a really bad temper and the cartel didn't help that. I was allowed certain liberties to do things to people and I couldn't do that anymore. And so I was just really stressed out. I started falling behind on the payments. I started using my credit card to make my payments. And on top of that, now I'm on insulin, but I'm working. I got a job at Sierra Nevada Brewing, which is a great company to work for, 401, but it was a $5 pay cut.
You had diabetes?
Yeah, so I had diabetes and I couldn't afford my medication. And because I had a prior federal charge, I couldn't get food stamps. So the Sierra Nevada gives you a case of beer every payday. So I had all this beer and no food. I remember just crying, looking at my refrigerator, thinking, I have a refrigerator full of beer and no food. You know, so I started going to churches and getting food. But, you know, Paradise is a very strange, that whole Butte County is very strange, that if you're down, they kick you. You know, they have a huge homeless population now, but at the time it wasn't even very big. But they're not much on social services. They're not much on building infrastructure and jobs. You know, it's a very strange kind of area. It's not
Is it conservative up there politically?
Very politically conservative. It's, you know, my grandfather and grandmother are from there, and it's not the same town that they lived in. My mother moved back up there and she was shocked. You know, people are not very kind up there, and they're conservative and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. They don't understand social problems, you know, and social forces and this kind of thing. So yeah, I got laid off from my job. I'm borrowing on my credit cards. The thing with the cat lady who failed to pay her rent and had all these cats in my beautiful cherry wood floor place. She stops paying rent. So I relapse. I relapse on heroin. Probably the worst thing I could have ever done at the time, but the only coping skill that I had, you know, and in retrospect, the next time around, I thought, you know what, you need coping skills. You need something else, because this shit is nuts. Pardon my language, but it's not working. This coping skill that I have is something that's been going on for like 30, 40 years, and it's not serving you.
Let me share this with you. I have a former pastor. He's in San Diego. He's a current pastor. He's just my former pastor, who had a cocaine addiction before he became a pastor. And he didn't use this exact language because he was in the pulpit in church when he said it. But if he weren't in the pulpit and he used the language he wanted to use, what he conveyed to us was, when the shit hits the fan in your life, the first thing or person that you turn to, that's your God.
Yeah, yeah.
And when he said that, that hit me right between the eyes, because I'm fortunate enough that when it hits the fan in my life, I literally turn to God and nothing else.
Right.
But when I was younger, and life didn't have to get quite that bad where the shit has hit the fan, but any type of adversity or stress, I would either drink or smoke weed. And not
Right.
conscious as that was my coping mechanism, but at that moment, that's your God. That's what you're turning to, thinking that that's going to help you get through the moment, the week, the month, the year, whatever. So all of those factors stressed you out. You relapsed, started using heroin.
Yeah, and I was isolated. I was very isolated in this town. Like, it's
Are you still on probation, or you're off probation at this point?
I've been off. I actually petitioned the court and I got off early off of the supervised release.
Okay, so you're back using. Talk to me about the bank robbery sentence.
So I'm back using. So what is my second go-to once I start using? Trafficking. That's what those two for me, because I have this policy also that is ingrained that you're not going to sit there and use up all your money or start robbing or start stealing. That's what you're not going to do. And so, so trafficking is what I go to. I don't, in my eyes, it's not harming other people in my eyes. At that, when I'm using, that's the least harm I can do to society, which actually is a grave harm, but in my eyes, it's not robbing, it's not stealing from people, it's not doing petty theft, it's not, it's not murdering people or hurting people. So I go back to trafficking every time. So I went back to trafficking, only now it's a little more difficult because I've got to drive to San Francisco to cop, you know. So I go down to San Francisco, walk up and down a Mission a little bit, and I see this kind of scruffy looking guy. And I say, hey, do you know where to get some hop? Because they call it hop there. It's really weird. I'm like, hey, can you get some hop for me? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he starts calling the guy. I kick him down a little bit. We do that about 3 or 4 times until finally some inconvenience happens and I end up having to meet the guy by myself. Well, the minute I meet the guy by myself, he's like, what are you doing with this dude? Like, just go through me. And I'm like, okay, cool, thanks. So I connection jump. I go through him. And of course, he likes the way I operate. It happens every freaking time. He likes the way I operate. And he's like, listen, how about I just set you up in a hotel over here in San Francisco and you slang for me? And I'm like, you know, yeah, I don't know. And so I turned that offer down, but I just continue to bring the drugs back to, and they're terrible. Worst heroin I've ever seen in my life, San Francisco, because by the time it gets up the coast, it's so badly stepped on. It is like 1/10 of the power that it is. I see why people use fentanyl to cut it, because it's just nothing. And this is pre-fentanyl. So I'm just like, man, this is really bad dope, but I continue to use and continue to sell it. Paying everything with the credit cards. My mental health is spiraling down. My folks at this point, I lose my job at Sierra Nevada. I didn't use the heroin until after Sierra Nevada. I wasn't using when I was working it, but the fact someone else said I damaged some equipment, which I didn't damage. And I wish they would have had cameras, but anyway, I got let go from that job. So, and I pleaded with them. I told them, you know, if you have cameras, look at the cameras. I absolutely didn't do that, but they're like, no, that's it. It was an expensive piece of equipment. You're not being honest with us. And I was being honest. And so they let me go. So, and I was the only girl in the bottle shop at the time. And they had me sharing the locker room with the men. And I told them, you know, I'm not really comfortable. Like, the men were purposely stripping down in front of me. I felt like they were doing it on purpose. And I was kind of just seen as an intruder. I mean, I went to HR about it, and they're like, yeah, we think you're exaggerating, because I was the only female at the time. They weren't very inclusive with women working with the hardware. So anyways, I lost that job, plain and simple. And that's when I really started to spiral downhill and making the trips to San Francisco and coming back up again. And then I had this nice couple renting the house. And then with astonishing swiftness, they started to foreclose on the house. And by then I was just homeless. My folks are like, nope, can't come here. And I was just homeless, staying in my car and staying at friends' houses. And it was summertime, and I really didn't even have a lot of gas, so I couldn't run the air conditioning. And I'm not kidding you, it was 110 in Sacramento. And it was so hot, but I couldn't run the engine. And then I was so hungry, I'd just walk around the store crying because I couldn't get any food. I couldn't get any insulin, because by then I had a bad infection on my leg and I needed insulin. I'm not insulin dependent, but the infection made it really necessary for me to take it. So I had these, you know, my legs were burning up from this infection. I was hungry. I was sick. I felt like, you know, the banks just really did me dirty, especially Washington Mutual. They would like, if I put 2 checks in, they would purposely cash that, the bigger check first, and then bottom my account out, and then demand overdraft fees. And then, like, I just felt like they were doing so much dirty stuff against me. And then by the time they foreclosed on the house, Wells Fargo had it. And they just foreclosed so fast. I couldn't even short sale the house. And I just had gotten myself into this condition of having bad health, this leg infection. My fever was like 103. I had no food.
Did you just walk into a bank and rob it?
So I grabbed a napkin, from a Burger King napkin from behind my seat, and I wrote a note the last straw was that my phone had broke and I've been paying $5 insurance on it every month. And when I called them to say to replace the phone, they said it'd take another 200. And I'm like, why? I've been paying insurance. That was Sprint. And so that was the last straw. So I was in the parking lot on the payphone when they told me I needed $200 more. And I was like, that's it. Walked to my car. I wrote a note. It said, this is a bank robbery. Don't make it a murder. And I parked at the Dairy Queen behind the bank in Oroville. And I walked into the credit union, my credit union. And there was an old lady that was standing at the door and she had a little cane. And I told her, don't go in this bank. And she looked at me like, with this snotty look. And she's like, I told her, do not go into this bank. Because I also remember the felony murder rule. And if somebody drops dead while you're doing committing a felony, you know, you're going to be liable for that. So I told her, no matter what, you don't go in this bank. And she was just like, ah. So she planted her little cane outside and she stood there and I swung the door open and went into the bank. And I swear to God, it was like I got struck deaf. Like it was dead silence. It was a Friday morning when I went in there and all I could see was this big old clock going. That was the only noise I heard was that tick, tick. And I was like, oh.
Like a movie scene, like a movie scene.
Well, yeah, like a movie scene. So I had the ski mask rolled up over my face. And the ski mask, getting a ski mask in the summer, that's a whole different story. And so I have the ski mask rolled up on my head like a beanie. So I walk in and it was so quiet. I was just like, oh my God, you know, you're committed now, you have to do it. So, but I look and there's a line to the tellers. Well, you know, I don't like to take cuts. I remember thinking, what am I going to do? Like, I don't take cuts. Now, mind you, I'm in the bank to rob it, but I'm like, damn, I don't take cuts in banks. Like, what am I going to do? Wait in line? And so, because you don't think that stuff out. So I'm like, no, you're not going to wait in line. You're going to go to that counter and you're going to slap your note down. So I walked around the little velvet ropes and I kind of like just nudged this lady that was at the window out of the way, put my note on the counter and slid it across to the lady. And by then I'd pulled the ski mask down, right? So I have the ski mask down. I give her the note. The lady looks at me, you know, I know to go to a young teller, an inexperienced teller. You don't want to go to a veteran teller. You don't want the manager's bank in the desk in the front. You want the manager's desk in the back. So everything was set up just right. So I passed that note to her and she looked at me and her eyes got real big, you know, and I started telling her what to do. And I don't know where that even came from. I'm like, both drawers now, move. Because I know I only have 3 to 5 minutes from the time they hit that button for the response of the law enforcement to get there. So I'd seen enough cop shows and, you know, learned a little from my class, which probably worked against me. So I'm like, move it. Well, I didn't know that in that little small credit union, they only have one drawer. They don't have the top drawer and the bottom drawer. So she runs to the teller next to her and starts getting her key to open the drawer. And the teller is like, hey, and she's like, we're being robbed. And she's like, oh, and she steps back and lets her get that drawer. Well, later on, law enforcement is like, did you tell her to go there? Did you tell her to go to the next drawer? I go, no, it was actually just a coincidence. I thought she had 2 drawers, so I told her both drawers. So then she went next door and got that other money, but I didn't tell her. Because the thing is, you get a strike for each teller. That's considered a separate robbery for each teller. I found out later on. So that was kind of a happy mistake. So yeah, so she gives me the money. I go outside. The old lady's still standing there indignantly. Well, it turns out that old lady had a camera phone. So that was not a good thing. She took several pictures of me exiting the bank. That's what I get for being nice. So I go through this vacant lot. I could hear like the gravel crunching under my feet. I remember I bring my own bag. So I'm carrying my bag out of the bank with the money in it and headed towards my car. I had duct tape on the license plate, ripped that off, got in my car, and this is where things go very wrong. So I go to peel out of the Tasty Freeze, and in my confusion, and like you have so much adrenaline pumping through you after that kind of thing, that instead of pulling out the exit driveway, I accidentally ended up in the drive-through. And there's like a 3-foot retaining wall on the other side of the drive-through, so you can't just peel out of the drive-through. And when I looked in the rearview mirror to put the car in reverse, there was like this SUV full of giggling kids behind me. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm trapped in the drive-through. So, and the lady keeps saying, welcome to Tasty Freeze. Can I have your order? And like, finally, I just turned around and I'm like, give me a root beer float. And so, I mean, there's nothing I can do, right? Like, I'm in the drive-through at Tasty Freeze and it's 100 degrees and I have a hoodie and I took the mask and threw it on the seat, but like, I'm sweating like a snitch at a gangster party, right? Like, I'm heated anyway. So I'm like, yeah, give me a root beer float. So she says, go ahead, you know, and pull up. But it felt like an hour before that banged up Kia ahead of me pulled up, like sputtered off. I'm like, what is he doing? Like, I kept expecting the cops to like just get me any minute, you know. I was just terrified. And so finally that car sputters away and I pull up and she gives me the price and I just grab whatever denomination out of that big bag that I got and I hand it to her. And I see her look over this way and I'm like, what is she looking at? And she's a young girl, like 17, 18. And she's looking over at the street and I follow her gaze and there go all the police cars right past me. And then like that Crown Vic with the cherry on top behind those police cars. And she's like, wow, I wonder what happened. And I'm like, well, I don't know. so I just pulled out onto the street. And of course, it's right next to a freeway because that's another thing. The bank has to be close to a freeway. So you could, for easy getaways, at least do that. And so I just got on the freeway and took off. And so I'm on the freeway and I'm looking at all this money because I haven't seen that much money, I don't think, ever in my life, right? It was probably like 10,000, 8,000 in cash. And I guess I had swerved a little bit. It was a 2-lane, like 99, Highway 99 or 70, something like that. And I had swerved a little bit and didn't realize it. And this guy next to me was on the cell phone. He honked at me and he was on the cell phone. And I'm like, oh, he's got a lot of nerve. He's on his cell phone. Well, what he was doing was he was calling Highway Patrol and reporting me as a drunk driver. So they had the path of travel then. They knew which way I was going then, right? So I had borrowed $200 from a friend to make my car payment. So first thing I thought of is I'm going to his house and pay him back for the money he loaned me. You know, like he was an older guy, he was really nice. I wanted to make sure I paid him back. So I went up the hill and I'm like, hey, I got your money. And he's like, you do? And I'm like, yeah, I just robbed a bank. And he was like, this guy's not a criminal. He's a nice guy. He starts closing all the drapes and everything like that. I don't know. I just, for some reason, didn't realize the gravity of what I've just done, or I don't know what I was thinking. And so I said, let's go get some Chinese food. So he's like, yeah, let's take my car. Well, we take my car. And I'm like, okay. I said, I'm going to go pay for the new phone with this money, that new phone that they want to charge me $200 with. And then we'll go out and, you know, we'll get some Chinese food. So we go to get Chinese food. And I'm like, do you want to split like a number A? Or he's like, you just robbed a bank. I think we can get our own meals. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, I don't have to live poor. So yeah, so we got Chinese food and we went back up the hill to Paradise. And there was a tow truck in front of my car and I was pissed. I saw that tow truck and I'm like, man, you know, why are these guys towing my car? Like, and so when I got out to ask the tow truck driver, I'm like, hey, why are you towing my car? He's like, ask those guys. And 2 detectives came running out from like the bushes or somewhere. I don't know where they came from. And they started acting all crazy, like, sit down, put your hands up, sit down on the driveway, sit down on the driveway. And I sat down the driveway. They're like, where's the man? Where's the partner? Is this the guy? You know, and the guy I was with he's kind of a slower old man. You know what I mean? I don't know whether he took too many hits to the head or what, but he's a little slow. And I'm like, no, whatever you do, don't hurt him. He has nothing to do with it. He didn't know nothing about it. No. He just gave me a ride. So I want to make sure that he's like cleared, right? And so so they kept asking me where the man was, and they're like, women don't rob banks by themselves. And that's when it kind of hit me. I'm like, what do you mean women don't rob? Nobody told me this. Like, it was really weird. That was a really gendered moment too. I was like, what do you mean women don't rob? I said, well, I did. And they're like, I guess because I had high bucket seats, someone had said there was a man in the car waiting for me. And plus they just assume, you know what I mean, that a woman
Well,
is
anytime cops tell you they don't profile, they're not being truthful.
Yeah.
Any
So
cop that says that that's not something that their profession does, it's just not true.
yeah, and especially in this this county, they're back about 50 years in this county. So
you got caught there on the spot.
So I got caught, but the problem was when they tried to take me to the jail and they do that thing where they check you, you know, the little frisking thing, they grabbed hold of my legs. And the problem was my legs were so bloody and so infected, and I had such a high fever. When I had 103 fever when they took your temperature there in intake, the jailer's like, no, she's got to go straight to the hospital. Like, she has open wounds and sores, and she's got to go straight to the hospital. So they took me straight to the hospital, and the hospital looked at the detectives, and he's like, I'm sorry, guys, she should have been in the hospital weeks ago. Like, and I tried to go to the hospital weeks ago, but I didn't have health insurance. So they kept saying, you can't afford the medication, and they sent me home twice. And so, yeah, so anyway, they said, we'll have to keep her here in the hospital. And so they left me in the hospital. And then I kept calling the next day. I kept calling the sheriffs, and I'm like, where's my car? Where's my car? And they're like, your car's an impound. And I'm like, well, I'm coming to get it. Again, I don't know. So I said, well, I'm coming to get it. I mean, and who even does that? And so they said, okay, come and get it. I said, okay, I will. And so I kept signing out. I signed out AMA, but they kept, you know, I was in a lot of pain. They kept giving me painkillers and Dilaudid, and it kept knocking me out. And I know they were doing that on purpose, but finally I told them, no, you're not. I ripped the IV out, and I'm like, no, you're not giving me any more shit. I'm leaving. And just as I'm going out the hospital, the police sergeant shows up, or lieutenant. He was a lieutenant. He shows up, and he's like, well, there's my little bank robber. And I'm like, shut up. He's like, have you not seen the 5 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news? Have you not seen it? And I was like, no. He goes, well, it's no secret. He goes, you want to ride to your car? And I was like, the front or back? And he's like, the front. And I said, okay. So he puts me in his Crown Vic, and we're riding, you know, through the country, going back to the police station. And he's like, tell me where my guys were after you robbed that bank. What were you doing? Where did you go? Because no one could find you. I said, I actually was in Tasty Freeze drive-through. He said, what? And I said, yeah. He goes, that's what you did, is you got a root beer float? I said, well, I didn't do it on purpose, sir. You know, I accidentally went through the drive-through thinking I was going through the exit. So, you know, it was, you know, it's been really hot here.
You ever see that television show, The World's Dumbest Criminals?
Yeah.
Well, it's not that you were dumb and did that on purpose, because there are some people who are actually like, well, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go do this. You just got stuck there.
Yeah, but it was a happy coincidence. But he's like, so you're kidding me. So you were getting a root beer float. Well, my guys were at the scene of the crime. I said, well, yeah. And he said, and you drive a red car? I said, yeah. And he's like, man. And so he took me to get my vehicle. He said, I don't have your keys. I don't know who has your keys. And he said, but you know, there's your car. And it was all torn apart in the impound lot. And I said, well, I have a key hidden right here in the tire well. I'll see you later. So he told me, okay, it'll be a couple days before the warrant drops. Now, don't go anywhere. Don't rob another. No, he said, don't rob another bank. I said, okay, sir, thank you. And this police lieutenant lets me go.
What's his name?
Nichols. His name.
You know his name.
Huh?
What's his name?
Nichols.
What you Lieutenant Nichols?
Yeah, from Butte County, from I guess it was Oroville PD, Oroville Police Department. Yeah. he got in trouble. You know what? He was the nicest man ever too, but he got in trouble because he let someone else go, and that person was a violent, I guess he assaulted someone after that. But he was a super nice guy, but well, yeah, and you think like if I was a person of color, you know, I wouldn't have never gone anywhere. I'd have been.
I mean, listen,
I know. I'm the luckiest of persons in the most unlucky situation.
I'm speechless. I'm because the whole time you're telling the story, it's like he's taking you to get your car. He's taking you to get your car for what?
I know. It's just so crazy. And so he lets me go. And so, you know, you let me go. I'm still addicted to heroin. Now I'm looking, I know at a prison sentence from those little shenanigans. I still have a horrible infection in my leg, which is, I still have a high fever. Like, so basically I mean, I was let go, and it was my request, you know, to be able to walk out. And this guy, you know what I mean? And I'm in the same exact position that I was before the bank robbery, only now I think I have the cell phone. I have the new cell phone. But yeah, like nothing has changed. Like, why would you let somebody go in that same condition? Because the chances of them committing the exact same crime again are really high. And so I went to see my brother, and he was like, because he's an attorney in town, and he's like, get out of my office now. I don't want nothing to see with. I've been watching the news. Get the hell away from me. Do not come. He had the key to my post office box. And I said, all I want is the key to my post office box, and I won't bother you anymore. Don't worry. So he throws the key at me, and I take off, and I was supposed to get a disability check. I forget, from NorCal Waste, I damaged my back and was getting disability, and the check wasn't there. I don't know why the check wasn't there, because, you know, it was late or something. And that was it. Once the check wasn't there, and I remember being so thirsty and so sick, and there was this lady outside the post office, and I said, ma'am, could you please give me a ride to my car? And she said, I most certainly won't give you a ride anywhere, and said something derogatory. And I was like, okay. So I walked to my car. And so it was that kind of desperate treatment that I received. And then the fact that I was in the same position that I was before, no money, no nothing, only less than a quarter tank of gas in my car. And I was like, okay, well, let's do this again. This time, you know, see if you can do it right. So don't go near anyone, you know. So
let me ask you something. When you robbed the second bank, how long was that after you robbed the first bank?
I think like 2 or 3 days.
And this is after the cop who knew you robbed the first bank let you go.
Right. Like, people don't even believe that, but I mean, I wouldn't have never gotten out, because, you know, the way to verify it is I got caught at the last bank first. So even though they caught me at the first bank, they let me go. And so I had to stand trial in the last county first, and then Butte County wanted another. Then Butte County said, bring her up here.
Right. We haven't dealt with the first bank robbery.
Yeah. So, and I should have robbed Washington Mutual, now that I think about it, because that was the bank I really had beef with. And so I went to Wells Fargo, and I was sitting in the parking lot because I really, really could not stand Wells Fargo. But the manager's desk was right near the front door, and I was wearing an orange San Francisco Giants jersey. And I remember the lieutenant telling me, oh, the Giants, that's my team. And he gave me like a little fist pump before I left. And I was like, he knows that's my jersey. Like, he knows. So if somebody with a SF jersey, he's going to know. So I took the jersey off, and I went to another credit union, which happened to be my dear father's. And he was like, you robbed my bank. And I was like, well, Dad, it was nothing personal. And so I drove around the corner instead to this other, it was like Butte Community Bank. And I went to that bank, and I had a windbreaker, and I put the windbreaker on over my head. I was like, maybe they'll think I'm a guy if I do this, you know, and I put on a pair of sunglasses, and I went into the bank, and it was like I couldn't get their attention. They were so dismissive, and this lady was on the phone, and I handed the one lady the note, And then I see the lady behind her on the phone and I'm like, hey, tell her to get off the phone. And she's like, Judy, get off the phone. And she's like, I most certainly am not getting off the phone. I'm talking to a customer. And I was like, bitch, give me your ID. Give me your ID now. Give me your license. Because somebody.
Were you armed when you when you robbed these?
No, I was never armed. That's a 10-year enhancement. I already knew.
Okay.
Like, I know I'm not going to go down like that. And guns are scary. They could go off. They could kill you. Like they could be turned against you. Like the bank employees are instructed to give that money without a fight and without violence. And I know that. So why bring violence into a place that I don't need violence?
Right.
And so, but yeah, this girl wouldn't get off the phone. So I'm like, give me your license, give me your driver's license. Because someone had told me a long time ago, you get that driver's license, they're not going to mess with you because that's their home, And so the lady started crying and she was like, I don't have my purse on me. She hung up the phone. No, that's all I wanted her to do. And I was like, whatever, just give me the money and let me get out of here. And later the police told me, there were some people in the bank that didn't even know the bank was being robbed. You were so subtle about it. I said, I know. I try to, not be crazy. I said, but sometimes they get an attitude, with you, understandably. So I took that money. And this time I'm like, I'm not staying in town this time because I damn well know they're going to say that it was me. And so, it was 2 days earlier that I'd robbed a bank. So it was like July 14th and July 16th and July 21st or something. So
where'd you go?
So this time I headed straight for I-5, which is probably about 45 minutes away because I-5 doesn't go through this town. And I went through all the almond orchards and everything else. And I went straight for that freeway and headed to Oakland.
Okay.
So I knew people in Oakland because that's where I had been going down and trafficking the heroin and everything back and forth. So I show up to my guy's house in Oakland and he lives in the Campbell Street projects. And I don't know if you ever heard of them, but they're pretty, I stick out like a sore thumb at the Campbell Street projects. And my friend, his name was Cross-Eyed Carl, he wasn't there, right? And so there was another guy there and I'm like, hey, I need you to give me a couple rigs and get me like an ounce of heroin. And he's like, all right. And so, but you have to be careful how you bring your cash out in this area. Because if they see that much cash, they're going to jump you. That's just the way things are in that neighborhood. And so I said, and I really have to get off these streets. So, but I waited for Carl to come back. And he finally came back and he's like, hey, you can't, I told him what had happened. And he's like, well, you can't land here because this is like the first place. The cops will have no hesitancy coming in here and shaking me down. So you could stay. He fixed me a nice, man, it was a good breakfast too. The really fat kind of bacon and some cheese grits and some eggs and everything. It was a really good breakfast. So he fixed me breakfast. He's like, hey, stay in touch, but you got to bounce. I'm going to tell you where to stay in Oakland where the cops won't ever bother you. So he went with me and got me a hotel. He's like, you can stay here as long as you want with that kind of money you got. And so he said in Oakland PD, they're only worried about, murders and rapists. So they ain't going to pay no attention to you. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, he set me up in Oakland in a hotel down there. But the problem was the cops kept coming to the hotel for other people. And it was making me a nervous wreck because they would pull in front of my car and I'm like, oh, it's about to go down right now. Let me go get my ice cream and start eating because it was just too nerve-wracking staying in the city and with all the yelling and the screaming, like, oh, no, I couldn't do it. So
how'd you get caught? How'd you get caught this time?
Yeah, so I decided to be bold. I finally went to Vacaville and stayed in another hotel, but it was hard because I didn't have an ID, but I just told them someone stole my purse. I don't have an ID. Like I always had a good game, good story. So they let me stay. I stayed in Vacaville. And then a friend of mine who was not that good for me told me, well, if you're going to continue this bank robbery stuff, you really do need a gun. You need to come pick up one of my pieces, and go from there. And I'm like, all right. So another bad decision after another. So and it's just nerve-wracking being on the run. By now they have a bolo out for me. You know what I mean? I'm wanted in all these counties. My picture's on the TV. They keep my middle name is my mom's first name. So my poor mom, her friends keep calling her, Jane, we're so sorry. And she says, I mean, I'm not talking to them, but people are telling me, she told me later. And so, yeah, so people were trying to get me to turn myself in. They're like, what the police chief in Oroville did was he listed me as armed and dangerous. That was his way of getting me back, I guess.
Oh, wow.
He had said that I was armed, which I wasn't. So now they're out to kill me, right? They don't think I'm the nice person that I was. And so somebody else had told me, the news is saying you're armed and dangerous, be careful, the cops are out to kill you now. And it's a whole different ball game now. And I'm like, all right, I got some for those cops. And so I decided I'd rob a bank on the way to my friend's house. It had become so habitual and such kind of a rush. And I just didn't care. I'm like, oh, let me rob another one on the way to his house. So I stopped in UC Davis, and I think it was a Union Bank. And I went in there and everything was wrong. Everything was wrong. I had the money from the previous banks hidden inside my passenger seat. And, when you have that much money and drugs in your car, you want to lock your door. So I locked my doors, power locked them from the inside, and then got out, but didn't realize that the single key that I now had, my spare key, had fallen out of my pocket onto the seat, and I power locked the doors. So I power lock those doors, and I go inside the bank, and I have my Dollar Tree bag, and which the cops didn't think was funny at all. And I go in there, and the manager's desk is right near the front, and the only teller that seems to be working is this older lady, and the glass is bulletproof. But I guess I think I'm bulletproof. I don't know. So I go up there, and I still go through it, and I slid the note under there, and she looked right up at the glass. And I said, I will pull you and that money right through this glass if you want to try me. I said, give me the fucking money and get it to me now. You have 60 seconds.
And you had a gun on you this time?
No, I hadn't picked up the gun yet.
Okay.
Thank God. I hadn't picked up the gun, or I wouldn't have been talking to you today. And so I made a pretty hefty threat. She started giving me the money, but she had these long fingernails. And when I went to, because I had to pull that bag through that bulletproof thing, she had tore the bottom of the bag with her fingernail. And I didn't really think about it then, but I understood later why there was a hole in the bottom of my bag. So I go running out to the car, and guess what? That freaking car is locked. It's locked tight. Every door in there is locked tight, and it's a newer car, so I have tempered glass. So it's even harder. I wrapped my jacket around my fist. I knew I had the 3 to 5 minute limit. 2 minutes had already gone by, maybe 3. And I started pounding that window, and it did not break. So then I look up, and I see a FedEx truck. And I think, well, they always got toolboxes in those FedEx trucks. So I'm gonna grab that toolbox out, come back, get a tire iron, and bust that window and be gone, and then get rid of that car. So I ran to the FedEx truck. There's a toolbox right there under the seat. I'm like, yes, I run back with the toolbox. And mind you, I'm still sick as a dog. Like, I still have a fever. I still think like I should have never been convicted because I was out of my mind with that fever, but whatever, that played no part in any decisions of theirs. And so I tried it. I opened the box, the toolbox, and all it had was a black sand triangle, reflected triangle in it, filled, weighted down with that heavy black sand. And I was like, oh my God. In the meantime, some little old lady pulls up behind me, and she's like, dear, can I help you? Can I help you? And I'm like, no. I said, you got a tire iron? She's like, well, no, but I could call you a tow truck. I'm like, no, get away from me. And she's like, but dear, can I help you? And I'm just like, oh, this little, and her car's running, and her keys are going ding, 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 because she got her door open. And I'm like, man, I should just shove her out of the way and grab that car and go. But she looked like one of my mom's friends or whatever, and I can't put my hands on a person like that. I was just like, just get away from me. She's like, dear, your money's falling out of your bag. And there's like this trail of freaking 20s on the ground. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. And I, switched it to the other hand. It was just like a crap show, So
Did you get caught there in the lot?
Yeah, so the triangle didn't work. I beat it till the sand was all over the place. And now they're there. And now they're there. And I'm listed as armed and dangerous and escape. This motherfucker said I escaped from custody. Oh my God. And you know
The dude that let you go.
huh? Yeah.
The dude that let you go said you escaped.
Yeah. Well, no, as soon as I robbed the second bank, I had escaped and I was armed and dangerous. So the whole picture had changed. So I saw something there and I'm like, well, you know, in people terms, that's what I get. That's what I get for doing that. But he knew he did me dirty because I did him dirty. He told me don't rob any more banks than I did. So he listed me as escaped and armed and dangerous to cover his ass. So he got me. So they come, they draw down on me, you know, make a cross, do that thing with your feet. I don't know. There was a lot of instructions being thrown at me. I just remember dogs barking. And I remember thinking if those dogs get a hold of my legs, I'm going to go through whatever ceiling there is. Like and they had tasers. They said, oh, we got the tasers on her. We got the dogs. I could hear them talking back and forth. And all I could think about was, man, my legs are going to scream with pain when they do that. So I did everything they told me to do. And the one cop yelled, and you're not going to escape like you did in Oroville. I was like, I did, but I didn't escape. Like I wanted to tell them, but it was not the time or place and no one was going to listen to me anyway. You know, I'd had my home foreclosed on. Sprint did me dirty. I had one last payment in the bank for that car and someone had stolen my ATM card while I was asleep on somebody's couch and took that money out. I showed the bank the footage and said, this is the guy. The bank did nothing about it. Like it was an accumulation of losses and lack of coping skills and support. But I knew that all I was a drug addicted, vagrant bank robber when it came down to it. And that's all people were going to see. They weren't going to see the loss. They weren't going to see everything that I'd suffered, the layoff because of the recession, the illegal foreclosure, as it turned out. I got a settlement for the illegal foreclosure. They weren't going to see any of that. They were just going to see a junkie that was robbing banks. And that's exactly what they saw. And that's kind of what fuels me now, because I want people to see us and the stories behind us, you know, not just, you know, these criminals that they think they see. So they take me away and I'm like, they're not going to keep me in jail anyway. They're going to take me to a hospital. So I go to the jail. Well, it turns out this jail's Monroe Detention Facility in Yolo County. And they dropped me into this jail. And it turns out that jail has an excellent medical staff and they have some agreement with UC Davis Hospital and that they're able to fly in because it turned out I had MRSA. I had on my legs, it had turned into MRSA. I had E. coli, I had everything on my legs that had developed and it needed a special kind of antibiotic that had to be flown in. So I had gone to the hospital before and they had said the last time I went, they were going to amputate my leg. And I left again on AMA. So now I'm getting the treatment. Lo and behold, I'm actually getting medical treatment. So it was really painful. I had to go through a lot of deep breathing. I was suicidal. They kept me in a holding cell and booking for over 30 days because I would attack any cop that came near me. I was just a mess. My folks did not speak to me, didn't acknowledge me. So I had no support. I think my son was overseas at the time. It was, you know, I'm sitting in the booking cell watching the news and the news, I'm sitting next to these other girls and the news comes on and they're looking at me like, that's you. I'm like, I know, you know, I know.
So you get sentenced to 8 years.
So what had happened was I got sentenced for the last bank first. So then they came back like 2 weeks later and decided to charge me with trafficking because they had found a sizable amount of heroin in my car. Okay. So then they charged me with trafficking with priors because of my federal prior. But it had been like 5 years, but it was like a wobbler type thing, but they could still hit me with a prior. So I was looking at 18 years for the one bank robbery in Yolo plus the trafficking. And and then they're like, you want to plead? I'm like, I'm not doing anything of the sort. I'm not pleading. You know, I'm not, I'm always kind of a jerk in jail. So I'm not like that at all. When I get to prison, I'm a very well-behaved inmate in prison, but not in jail. County does something to me that makes me violent and obstinate. So I'm like, no, I'm not taking that deal at all. I don't want that deal. If we want to go to trial, let's go to trial, but this is bullshit. Da, 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 da. And so we kept going back and forth. I ended up being in that jail for 9 months. And there's even a newspaper article that is still Googleable that says bank robber wrangles her own sentence. And so I realized that my public defender was not effective. She had a high caseload. I saw her flirting, literally flirting with the DA. I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. So once again, started going to the law library, looking things up. You know how I love to read and research. And I started working like on my own plea. I discovered that if there's a spree, you can only be sentenced for they cannot over sentence you. If I get 1 year in YOLO, I only get 1 year in Butte. So if it's a spree, it goes like that. You get whatever the first sentence was. So I had agreed to give me the maximum on the drug charges and only give me 1 year for the bank robbery. So that's what they did. They gave me like 6 years on the bank or drugs and 1 year for the bank robbery. So I finally get that all arranged and I'm like, okay, I'm at 7 years, you know, let's go to Butte County. So of course, Butte County comes and picks me up, you know, and they're really nice. Like, it's like kind of Andy and Mayberry kind of thing, you know, Andy Griffith Show kind of jail with the bars and everything. And everyone knows everyone's family. And they're like, we've been waiting for you to come up here. I'm like, yeah, I bet you all have. And so I get up there and of course, you know, like they put me in the high control cell and everybody's like, man, were you that bank robber? And I was like, yeah. So everyone started calling me bank robber. That name just stuck with me for the rest of my trip, for the whole, you know, time that I did.
So you got a year from them.
I got it. So yeah. So then I go to Butte County and I stay there for like 11 months. I stayed there for a long time too. And the judge, the probation report, you know, the probation reports are, to me, they're crazy. They're always going to put crime is escalating. This kind of behavior is escalating. We recommend the maximum. So when probation came, I said, you all have the probation report from Yolo County, right? You have that on you? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, nothing has changed since I did that. So, I mean, I gave you all the background. I gave you everything. I'm going back to take my nap, you know, in lockdown. Like, why are you even bothering me? And the lady left because I already know what they're going to, no matter how much I tell them what I've been through and everything's going on, they're still going to make me look like, you know, a gangster or something. And so, and of course, she reported to the judge that I was rude and obstinate, and I wasn't rude to her at all. I said, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, please, thank you. I'm sorry to waste your time, but you already have an existing report on record. You know, I don't see this as necessary. And she had kind of agreed with me. And then she, you know, she blasted me in the report saying there's no remorse. And I'm like, well, where's my remorse for the illegal foreclosure of my home? Where's the remorse for the hospital not taking care of me because I didn't have any money? You know, where's the remorse for the recession and me getting laid off after working like a dog for the past few years?
What were you hoping that they'd do for you? You knew you were going to get a year.
Well, no, I wasn't really sure about that. I wasn't sure that was going to work. And here's the thing. I had 2 bank robberies pending, right? So, but let me tell you what happened to the second one. So this is why, another thing, the second one is where that lieutenant let me go, right? So they came in and talked to me. The attorney came in, who was in the same building as my brother. He's like, that's not your brother, your real brother. I'm like, he is my real brother, believe me. He's like, I just can't believe this. And he's like, I may have to recuse myself because you robbed my bank too. And I'm like, okay, this guy was a terrible alcoholic. He was, again, overburdened caseload, could have cared less. But he said, let me tell you, he said, they're going to strike that second bank. They're going to take it away, because if they don't, the police lieutenant's name will come up. His name will come up. He could actually be contributing to this. So they don't want to see that. So they're going to remove any trace of that ever happening. And I was like, really? And I was like, so I won't have 3 strikes. He said, even if you have 3 strikes during a spree, you're not strikeable, because this was before 3 strikes was amended.
I was wondering
And
about
I'm like, he said, you can have 8 strikes during a spree and it won't count. So I was like, oh, okay. So I paid attention to what they said. And he said, so finally, after about 4 or 5 months, they removed the second robbery.
that. Okay.
They completely removed that. So then we worked on the first one. Well, he didn't really work on it. I did. Again, I researched. They have a law library there. But when I went to go before the judge, he said, well, I find no remorse. He said, actually, Miss Murray, you were kind of like a Ma Barker out there, weren't you? Just doing what you wanted, robbing what you wanted, this and that. And I didn't say anything. I just stood there because I'm like, wow, you know, you have no concept of what I've been through. And so he sat there and pronounced the judgment, and he said, I find you guilty. I'm sentencing you to the maximum of 5 years, you know, in state prison. And the federal, or not the federal, the district attorney is like, I'm sorry, or my attorney said, I'm sorry, sir, you can't do that. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? He said, there's been a precedent set by Yolo County. She can only receive 1 year for the bank robbery. And he's like, well, what am I doing here then? The judge he was pissed. He's like, well, what am I doing here then? Why did you even need me here? And he took his gavel and slammed it down, and he's like, 1 year. And that was how I got the year. But I felt like it could have gone either way, because I don't really know how that system, I didn't know enough about the system. But the problem was, now the police department in Yolo County took the money from the bank robbery in Butte County, both bank robberies, and kept it and never turned it in. They never gave me credit or anything. They never said, we found this money. So they sent me off to prison with an 8-year sentence at 85% and 2 violent strikes and a $12,000 restitution. And you make about 17 cents an hour in prison. So I ended up, I kept thinking the feds were going to pick me up. I kept thinking I was going to go back to federal prison. I kept thinking it. I'm like, why? And so my attorney said, well, we talked to the feds and they said, we're overcrowded too. If you could charge her with simple robbery, do it and keep her. It's cheaper. And I was like, no. So yeah, so I ended up with the 2 strikes and with the violence being put in a level 4 prison in Chowchilla. So
It's state prison.
State prison.
And that's where the politics and everything is.
That's where everything jumps off. It's the most violent place I've ever been in. And I mean, it's not just the most violent. It's more heartbreaking to me than violence. You know, is it
male and female prisoners?
Oh no, not state. State has always been gendered. Yeah, okay. You're separated. You're separated by race. You're separated by any of those constructs that can make it easier for those institutions to sort you. That's what they're going to use. Intersection, they've never even heard of the word.
So I got about 10 minutes. And I wanted to give you time to talk about all of these experiences. And I feel like we could go several more hours. I want folks to know what you're doing with your life now and how you're pursuing your education now.
Okay, well, let me just do 1 minute of the restitution.
Okay.
So they sent me to prison. They expected me to, on 17 cents an hour, to pay $12,000 in restitution, while the police department in Yolo had $10,000 of that and never reported it. So again, I was in the library. I wrote my own writ, which was gosh, I can't remember it now, but anyway, I wrote my own writ. I think it was a per se or something like that. hand wrote it on a piece of paper because I read about a guy who wrote his habeas corpus from the hole on a roll of toilet paper and was inspired and was granted a new motion for restitution. The police department in Yolo was asked to produce that money after a newspaper article stated that had been found with the serial numbers from Butte County Community Bank on it, and my restitution was reduced. I was able to pay my restitution off in full before the ending of my sentence and was able to advocate for myself. But it took me 4 years to actually get that done. So, yeah. So anyway, moving forward, I've actually never talked about my teen years like that. So it was very enlightening for me to go through that again, because I've always ignored that part of my life as a bad choice I've made. But moving forward,
right now, you're in school.
So in prison, I worked as a teacher's aide. I had a really high score on the adult basic education test, which isn't hard to do because the average, I was told by the prison instructors, the average grade is 5th grade education for the women in there. So unfortunately, there's a huge loss of education in there, and that's not a coincidence either. So I was always a teacher's aide in there. I enjoyed being a teacher's aide and helping other women get their high set and GED. I know what it feels like. Right. And when I came out, I went to a reentry program called CCTRP in Kearney Mesa, San Diego, which is new and open for violent offenders now. Before, only nonviolent offenders were allowed these programs. While I was there, the same girls that I tutored came at me again and said, "Can you help me? Can you help me get my GED and high set out here?" You know, we worked really well together. We had fun. Their scores started to go up. I got caught late at night, out of bounds, past lights out tutoring, and the education coordinator called me in and asked me what my deal was. At first, I didn't say anything. I was a knucklehead. I was like, "I'm not talking to you." She's like, "I want to know because some people's scores are going up, who you're tutoring." And I told her, and she's like, "That's what I thought." She said, "I'm going to put you in touch with someone at San Diego State who works with a program called Project Rebound. And I want you to talk to him." Because I told her, more than anything else, I want my undergrad degree. You know, I've always wanted to get it. I have a bunch of credits. I went to Palomar College back in the day. Education is really important to me. You know, it's an identity that I've lost, and I can't go back to driving heavy equipment. I'm getting older. I really think I'm going to go back to prison. So she talked to me. They finally allowed me, of all things, to go to community college at Mesa College, which is a beautiful community college. I could carry no cash. I had no cell phone. I was not allowed to talk to anyone. I was tracked with an ankle monitor. I had to go to school, skip any kind of lunch, wasn't allowed to eat lunch, or nobody could buy me lunch. I skipped lunch. I went to school. I applied to 4 different universities, was turned down by all of them, but Chico State. I appealed San Diego State after they denied me, and I was allowed admissions. And I took 15, 21 units a semester. I just slammed it. It was the first cohort of Project Rebound who advocate for the formerly incarcerated within the CSU system. And I started getting 4.0s every semester. Like, I could have cried when I saw that, because I've been sober ever since I left the gates of prison. It's not been easy. My parents have come back around again. We have a great relationship. They see me in a whole different light. I graduated with my undergrad degree, a double major in criminal justice and sociology. In 2019, was accepted to the master's program in criminology. Again, got a straight 4.0, a few scholarships, the Women in Leadership in California Scholarship, which is a competitive statewide scholarship. And I applied to PhD programs. I really don't know what's wrong with me, because those are really hard. You know,
Did you get your master's?
I got my master's. I graduated this last year.
Congratulations, Laura.
And despite COVID, I wrote an entire thesis. I just presented that thesis at the American Association, or the American Society of Criminology, last month in Chicago. And yes, I applied to 8 PhD programs in a very competitive time when a lot of slots were cut, and I was accepted to 4 of those programs, including John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which was my dream school, NC State University, where I'm at now, which is an R1 research university. My funds cover my tuition at either Duke, UNC Chapel Hill, and NC State. So, and I have the advisor of my dreams who actually, her studies are on women and reentry and incarceration. And, you know, to have Stacy DeCoster as my advisor is like a dream come true. And she's extremely supportive of me now. And my research will be on women and reentry and the social forces that work within those areas.
So you have your undergraduate and your master's from San Diego State.
Correct.
Well, I'm an Aztec too.
Yay, Aztec for life.
That's right. We're both Aztecs for life. I have my master's from San Diego State, and you're getting your PhD. You're pursuing your PhD at NC State.
Right.
In criminal justice?
No, it's sociology with an emphasis on crime, law, and society.
And what do you want to do ultimately once you get this PhD?
Well, first, I hope to stay sober for the rest of my life.
Amen. Amen.
And second, I want to go into advocacy and programming and applied research. That's really why I wanted to go to John Jay's. They do a lot of applied research. I want to take everything that I've learned along with my insight, and I want to advocate for those who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, and especially women. And someday I'd love to see intersectionality in there, you know, and I'd love to also work on policy for the LGBTQ community and that kind of work. I feel like the CDCR, the corrections, it's hard to take what I've learned about intersectionality and apply it in there. But I have hope for the future that someday, you know, everyone, because the statistics are just alarming for certain groups, you know.
Briefly explain to our viewers what you mean by intersectionality.
So intersectionality is like, okay, me as a white woman, I have one intersection, and that intersection would be gender. The Black women that I was in prison with, however, have multiple oppressions. So each one of these intersections is a form of oppression that is visited on them. If you're a Black woman, you have race as an intersection, you have gender as an intersection, you have culture as an intersection, and now you're incarcerated. So incarceration is an intersection on its own. And while Black men and white women were making gains in the employment world, Black women were still not making gains. So, I mean, even as pay goes, they're still at the bottom of that ladder. And it has a lot to do with intersectionality. Same thing with the American natives. You know, they have an oppression of historic trauma that is visited upon them. So it's not only that they're Native Americans, but there's historical trauma within the generations. Asian Americans, same thing. They're hypersexualized. They're associated with employment in nail parlors and that kind of work, and that kind of emotional labor is also intersectional.
So Laura, why do you care about these other groups of women?
I care so much because when I went to prison, I saw so many women that were suffering that never had a chance. They never had a chance as children. There was no equity. There was no education available to them. There was no bookmobiles. There was no understanding. Just like I was not understood when my house was foreclosed upon, these women were not understood from the time they were children. And then you want to take people and you want to put them in prison. You want to criminalize poverty. Like, to me, it just hurt me because these women, they became my sisters. They were my friends. And I left them, I left them behind in prison. And I don't want that to be for nothing. I want to go back for them. I want to help them, and I want to help the women that come behind them, feel like there's somebody, like I feel like somebody now, and it's just like, that's what drives me every day. I still stay in touch with a lot of these women, and they're my biggest cheerleaders. You know what I mean? I don't have a lot of confidence in myself a lot of the time. And I've made a lot of poor choices and mistakes, which, I feel fully accountable for, but they believe in me and they believe that I can do it, so.
Well, you can. You may have made some bad choices, but you've also made the choice to get 4.0s. I made that choice and wasn't capable of getting a 4.0. Right? So listen, I really admire what you've chosen to do with your life, despite what has happened to you and what you brought upon yourself. Now's the time to bring some other things upon yourself. And it looks like, well, it is a reality that the things that you're bringing upon yourself are not only going to help yourself, but help other people. And I think that's beautiful. I think I knew there was something about you. I wanted to have you on Cops and Convicts with us today. And I'm glad I made that decision. I'm glad you accepted my invitation to come on the show. Look, this is only our third show, and this is our first virtual show. And I wanted to make sure that our first virtual show featured you. And our viewers, I didn't know anything about you.
Nope.
When you said that you were incarcerated, I had no idea what you had done. So for our viewers that are watching, again, I want to remind everyone to hit the subscribe button and hit that thumbs up button for us. This was a learning experience for me, listening to all you've done and what you're doing now. And I'm confident that a lot of people who watch this are going to be cheering for you, like the women that you say you've left behind, and want to help. And if there's anything that I can do for you or we can do for you on this show to help you continue to move forward and help others, you have my contact information, because that's what this is all about. This isn't just about entertainment. This is about changing people's perspectives so that their behavior can change. And that's what you ultimately want to do with your degrees, is get people's perceptions to change so that their behaviors change, right? We're not just what has happened to us. We're not just the sum of the poor decisions that we've made. We're human beings. And that's one of the things that I remember that you said in this interview, that I'm not going to call those people illegal aliens. I'm not going to call them undocumented. They're human beings.
Right.
And I appreciate you saying that, Laura. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And let me just add, I stay in my son's 4-bedroom house over here in North Carolina. So that little boy that I took everywhere with me, that I fought for, that I starved for, he's over in Syria right now as a special forces soldier. And I just want to give him a shout out and tell him how proud I am. And, I may have made a lot of sacrifices, but I'm living in his 4-bedroom house right now. So he turned out to be a very good, decent human being.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. When you get a chance, if you're comfortable with it, send me a picture of you and him.
Okay, I will.
I want to see this handsome guy you've been bragging about.
I will.
Laura, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for letting me tell my story, Sean. I appreciate it.
Same here. And thanks for joining us on another edition of Cops and Convicts with Sean Sheppard.
Always, always. This is a valuable platform. Thank you. Bye-bye.